Colleagues and members of the public, we'll begin the meeting in 1 minute. On va commencer la réunion dans 1 minute. Colleagues, we're now back to the main City Council meeting, page 22 of the agenda, postponements and deferrals. FEDCO report number 18, rapport numéro 18 du Comité des finances et de développement économique. And we're also dealing with the waterfall report by the Auditor General. In time, it's been moved to this item from page 26. And we'll just go through directions and motions. First, I have direction to staff that as part of the amendments to the LPP agreements and in keeping with the letter received from OSEG on December 7th, 2020, in response to the request from the Mayor and the Sports Commissioner, Matt Fleury, staff ensure that OSEG's commitment to keep the Ottawa Red Blacks and 67s playing at Lansdowne Park for another 10 years is reflected in the revised agreement. So staff are comfortable with that. So that's a direction. Next is Councillor Menard. Would you like to introduce your motion, seconded by Councillor Deans, please?
Yes, I'll bring it up here on my screen. I'm not sure if people want it on their screen, but I've got it here. The motion is with regard to the 10-year extension and the 22-year retail changes. Whereas OSEG is asking the city to change the financial terms of the Lansdowne Partnership Plan without presenting a business plan or operational plan that would outline what will be done to improve the ongoing operational challenges of the site. And whereas in any other professional setting, this would require a full business plan showing how remediations will fix the current issues before any new long-term investment is made. And whereas the proposed 10-year extension would see the city give up market rents for the stadium, arena, and retail for an additional 10 years until 2054, and continuing to rent those spaces for $1 a year. Whereas the suggested changes to the participation rent and base rent mean Ottawa would not collect the base rent nor the 50% share of the annual net cash flow from the retail operations until after the year 2066, which is 22 years without these rents. And whereas under the waterfall, the city is expected to receive $0 at the end of the 10-year extension while ensuring asset lifecycle investments, and OSEG is expected to receive $468.4 million, less some initial equity. Whereas it has been confirmed by OSEG that they are pursuing the transfer of the retail portion of the site and would like to bring this into the waterfall with no analysis on the implications of this. And whereas the city intends to strike a working group and councillor sponsors group that will look into the long-term operational planning of Lansdowne Park. Whereas the most prudent course of action for the city would be to allow for some short-term relief while allowing the working group and sponsors group to consider the implications of the long-term changes being proposed. Therefore, be it resolved that City Council approve the 10-year waterfall extension of the Lansdowne Park Partnership Plan with the following conditions. A formal business plan and operational plan describing how long-term challenges with the site can be ameliorated is submitted to the satisfaction of City Council. That the Auditor General submits a value for money review of the proposed extension to the satisfaction of City Council. That staff conduct due diligence and ensure risk mitigation for the city should OSEG choose to leave the partnership even after receiving the new benefits in the deal, by reviewing alternative partnerships and a not-for-profit model of operation to be presented to City Council. And D, that these elements be presented to the working group and councillor sponsors group prior to going to full council for consideration in 2021, this term. And B, refer the proposed changes to the retail rent agreements and participation rent changes to the working group and Councillor Sponsors Group to review a transfer of sale of the retail portion of the site, the future revenue loss to the city, the effects on the waterfall, and the implications of the effects on COVID-19 on retail. And so,
Okay.
Mayor, did you want me to motivate, or are you going to get the
You
other?
want to speak to your motion? You're the only one on the list, so if you'd like to speak to your motion now. Ask
yeah,
questions.
sir, certainly. I've got, I can speak to it more in wrap up. I've got a PowerPoint, but in the meantime, I have questions for the Auditor General that I would like to ask first, and then I'll get into.
Hey, you're the only one on the list, so go ahead.
Okay, so hopefully the Auditor General is on the line. Mr. Hughes, in your report, you stated that the risk register does not include risks related to the long-term objectives of the LPP agreement and or financial risks related to the waterfall. Can you just describe more why that is an issue, that we're not taking into account long-term risks of this plan or long-term risks to the waterfall?
Mr. Mayor, through you to the councillor, I believe the councillor is referring to the original audit that we did on management of the Lansdowne contract. And as we have discussed in any of the audits that we've done, we believe that it's prudent to identify your risks in the short term, medium term, and long term. And we found issues with the risk assessment in the Lansdowne partnership.
I'm unmuted there. There we are. And right now, the city has not been using the original and our updated financial forecast during their financial results review to compare the actual performance against the original and updated expectations. So what effect does that have by not comparing to the original pro forma forecasts?
Mr. Mayor, I assume that question was addressed to me. From our point of view, we believe that that there is value in presenting the operations of the partnership, the activities of the partnership, and comparing them to the original pro forma that was presented to council when they improved the partnership. That doesn't mean that you should exclude any other analysis, but we believe that there's some value in presenting that as a comparator as well.
Thank you for that. And what were the original financial projections in terms of the city's revenue, and how have those shifted since the inception of the LPP?
Are you asking me that question, Councillor?
I am. These are all to you, Mr. Hughes. Okay. And by the way, Mr. Hughes, before you answer, I just wanted to say congratulations on your tenure as well as Auditor General, and I wish you the best in moving on. I wanted to preface my comments with that. I missed that, but I've appreciated working with you in the short time we've had to. So thank you for all you've done for the city. But these are all to you, and then I'll move to a very quick PowerPoint.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for those kind remarks. I don't, Mr. Mayor, I don't happen to have in front of me the numbers for the additional proposal that was made to support the Lansdowne partnership, but I do know that there was initially some prospect of a payout to the city through the partnership, and that subsequent to the original approval by council, it's now been determined that that will be there's little expectation of payout at the current time.
It's now been determined which, sorry, you cut out a bit there.
it's now been determined that there's little prospect of a return on the investment over the period of the partnership.
Okay, thank you for that. And my last question to you, Mr. Hughes, you found some anomalies with the waterfall, both for incorrectly allocated equity and the need to immediately remediate issues to ensure the city's interests are appropriately protected. Can you just go into a bit more detail on that, what you found?
Mr. Mayor, if the councillor is after exact amounts, I will ask Deputy Auditor General Sonia Brennan to provide those. If you are okay with general references, I could provide those. Mr. Mayor.
If you could give a high level, and then it'd be great to get some specifics.
There were a couple of areas where we identified, in our opinion, errors in the way some transactions were treated, and we highlighted those in our audit report. Perhaps Deputy Auditor General Sonia Brennan could provide those details. I know she's on the call.
Through Mr. Mayor, through to the councillor. In our report, we state that our finding was that there was the amount in OSEG's additional equity account was overstated by the amount of $6.5 million. Now, these are non-cash transactions. These are amounts in a forecasted waterfall distribution spreadsheet. The other item that was noted in our report was an item from 2012-2013, where again, the OSEG equity account, there was a timing difference in the minimum equity that was contributed at the time, the partnership between 2012 and 2013. And that timing difference resulted in an overstatement of $944,000. And again, these are estimates or items in the forecast of the waterfall that were uncorrected at the time that we reviewed those amounts. They did not have cash impacts. They still do not, but as you can also see in our report, we've identified them. Management has agreed to resolve those issues with OSEG.
Thank you for that. And I mean, the concerning part of this report was the general oversight, the lack of controls on where we're seeing how those allocations are made to the waterfall. And that is a continuing concern when you read that report, and given the roll-up of those consolidated financial statements and the inability to get into the details about what should go where and who decides that. And so I appreciate your work on this. Chair, I'll pass it back to you. That's the 5 on the auditor report. I've got another piece on the main item, which I'll come back to.
Sure, thank you. So the next motion we have is Councillor Gower, seconded by Councillor Fleury. Councillor Gower, would you like to introduce the motion, please?
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Mayor, I know this has been circulated previously, so if we could just go right to the therefore be it resolved. I'll read that and then I'll give you a quick overview. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to establish a stakeholder sounding board for the Lansdowne Park Staff Working Group, as described in this motion, that includes, but is not limited to, representatives from the following: the Old Ottawa South, Old Ottawa East, and Glebe Community Associations, a representative of Homewood Avenue residents, the Bank Street Business Improvement Area, the Ottawa Farmers Market, Ottawa Tourism, Invest Ottawa, the Ottawa Council of BIAs, le Regroupement des gens d'affaires de la Capitale Nationale, the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition, the Ottawa Festival Network, and the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, IATSE. So this is the staff report recommended, obviously the staff working group, as well as a council sponsors group that would advise that staff working group. So this motion seeks to add a stakeholder sounding board similar to what we have in place for other large city projects and initiatives such as the solid waste master plan. And I know this builds on a suggestion, a recommendation from Councillor Menard, the ward councillor, around involving community representatives. And this motion, or this suggestion of the members of the stakeholder groups, represents the citywide and important economic role that Lansdowne Park plays in our city.
Great. Thank you for that motion. And Councillor Fleury now has the floor for questions and comments on the waterfall or the Lansdowne report. And I believe Mr. Greenberg and Mr. Gowdy are also available, as is the city manager, for any questions that you might have. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Ma première question, c'est simplement au vérificateur.
First question is for the Auditor General. It's about, I'm always mixed up. We say you have a number of recommendations, and the city will say, okay, we agree with the recommendations, but ultimately, I don't understand the accounts that you've identified. You confirm that these elements have been heard by all parties. That's what is confusing me in your report and the recommendations. Mr. Mayor, yes, according to us, it's clear that the city and OSEG understand what they have to do in the partnership accounts. So when it says the city is in agreement with this recommendation, it's because these accounts will be corrected? Is that what you're indicating? Yes. And the city verified that OSEG agreed with the changes that must be made in the accounts. Thank you.
My intervention won't be any different than my intervention at FEDCO on the matter, I guess, earlier in November. I think we all have a stake in Lansdowne because we care about it, because it has been a success story when you think of the public spaces that were created, when you think of the Aberdeen and horticulture building. The challenge is the pandemic, and the challenge, frankly, is also the life cycle on both the stadium and the arena. I'll certainly put my name forward to participate in the discussions with OSEG as it relates to how can we ensure that ultimately we don't end up with an end-of-life state for an arena and a stadium and all the pieces that can pull together to make that particular element of the OSEG partnership as a sustainable one. So I want to thank everyone involved today. I think there's a long road ahead, and I want to also thank Mr. Greenberg and Mr. Gowdy for responding to the letter, the mayor and I know Councillor Menard was also interested in ensuring that there be a commitment for the much-loved Ottawa 67s, the Red Blacks, and the theme of sports that OSEG and the partnership with the city is rooted in. So thank you for the response. Merci, Monsieur Maire.
Merci, Conseiller. Councillor Dudas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have questions about the two motions before us, if that's the right time. The Councillor Menard's motion, it mentions in it, it states that OSEG will receive $468.4 million under the waterfall as a result of this report. I was hoping staff could provide some clarification, some insight into that, because that's not the number that I was left with when we were reading the report or understanding it. So could you provide some comment?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I may. So the 468.4 is the amount that they would recoup in interest, but they have unrecouped equity of 169. So the net amount that they're actually getting is 299 million over the 40 years. And that's significantly less than the 8% that they were originally expecting. It's closer to 4% return. And that's with the amendment. Without the amendment, they would be getting 216 in interest, but 174 million in unrecouped equity, which is only a net number of 42 million. So if we don't extend it 10 years, they only get 42 million over the 30 years. And that's less than 2% overall on those 30 years. So the current situation is untenable. and they're looking for additional equity and also to refinance a loan. The way it is currently situated, it would be impossible to do.
Okay, that's incredibly helpful to understand. Thank you for that, Isabel. And in respect to Councillor Gower's motion, which I will be supporting, but I would like some clarification on that. I've had the benefit of being on actually both of the sponsors group where we've had that sounding board. I just want clarification in respect to the role of this sounding board initiative, in that will they be feeding their insights into the staff working group? Will they be bringing that back as a report that will be public, or will it just be a matter of making sure that we have a fulsome discussion and provide that information? And Councillor Gower, I see now one more other thing. Would it be possible to include the Ottawa Board of Trade? Because we've included a number of our very prominent leaders in the industry in terms of businesses, and I know that they play a very significant role in our community in that respect.
So, Councillor Gower, is that a friendly amendment to add the Ottawa Board of Trade?
I would certainly accept that as a friendly amendment, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I can clarify from the motion that the stakeholder sounding board, made up of the community groups and the business groups in the motion, would be working with the staff working group and providing feedback. Perhaps Mr. Kanellakos can give some more clarity as to how that feedback would be formally captured from a governance perspective, so that FEDCO and Council are aware of how that feedback is being used.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our intent would be to use the sounding board to receive inputs that we could bring back to the sponsorship group. So the sponsorship group would have oversight over the working group and over our public consultation. So as we receive inputs from the public consultation and the groups that are listed in Councillor Gower's motion, all of that will be fed back to the sponsorship group, and ultimately staff would be making their recommendations from a compilation of all those things back to full council, or committee then council.
Okay. No, that's very helpful to understand, because when I saw the makeup of the group, once again, we have some individuals, some representation on it that may have competing interests. We may have a BIA in Canada that won't have as much input. So once again, I think it's important that we reflect on how they're going to provide input. And at the end of the day, it's going to be council, it's going to be the community, it's going to be those most effective that have the stronger role in this. So thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Moffat, please, on the amendments or the waterfall or the Lansdowne project.
Thanks. Just on the stakeholder sounding board. Obviously, I think it's a good plan, and helps and addresses some of the comments and desires that Councillor Menard had raised. But just to be clear on that, the motion says include but not limited to. So we don't necessarily need to be picking the members of that committee, of that board, the sounding board here today. That membership will be, as was the case with the Solid Waste Master Plan one, will go to the sponsors group for final decision, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moffat. Conseiller Cloutier, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I just note the absence of the Glebe BIA on that list, but if that's something that would be considered later on, I would be satisfied with that.
Yeah, is that a friendly amendment, Councillor Gower?
They're there.
It says the Bank Street Business Improvement, but not the Glebe.
I'm referring to the Glebe BIA. I think they're different.
Yeah. I think that should be Glebe instead of Bank Street, because Bank Street stops at the Queensway. So will you replace Glebe with Bank Street, Mr. Councillor Gower?
I would definitely take that as a friendly amendment. And I think, as Councillor Moffat pointed out, we are not limiting it to the groups that are in the motion, but it's a starting point to begin with. But I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Est-ce qu'il y a des autres choses, Conseiller Cloutier?
No.
Is there anything else, Councillor Cloutier? No, that's it. Thank you.
Second round now with questions and comments on Lansdowne.
Yeah, and if staff could just put up that PowerPoint before my time begins. And I do support Councillor Gower's motion. Thank you for bringing it forward and for making some of the edits to it in advance of the meeting. I do support that piece.
We're just waiting for the visuals.
Sorry, having a quick technical issue. One moment. Actually, we don't need the motion. I'll put up Councillor Menard's visuals. We'll have the motion back in a moment.
This would be a time for a Scott Moffat historical footnote. Do you have any history footnotes for us today, Scott? Too late.
I think he was telling me that Councillor McKenney and was it Councillor Brockening got the exact same votes on their first election? Anyway, Scott's better at that than I am. But I think I'm going to start in. So if you could just switch to the next slide, please. Perfect. So it's important that councillors understand there's two things that we're doing. It's not just a 10-year extension that's being looked at today. The other is a 22-year retail extension. It goes to 2066. So that 22-year retail extension Ottawa gives up the rent for those spaces in that portion of the site until 2066 and 50% of the net profits from the retail. Under the 10-year extension, we're giving up rent for the arena, the stadium, and the retail portion for the 10 years. And there is no competition for how the site could be operated in the future. We just move forward with this. And on the 22-year extension, there's been no analysis on how the transfer of the retail portion of the site will work. You've heard that they're looking for another partner to be brought in, and Mr. Greenberg mentioned bringing this into the waterfall, but no analysis by staff has been provided to councillors. We'd be approving something today that we don't know how it's going to look in terms of that waterfall, what it would do. It's a bit premature. Next slide, please. So this is what the waterfall looks like in terms of actual returns. And as you heard from city staff, there are some equity considerations. I've put in the investments at the front of this slide on OSEG's and the City of Ottawa's, how much we've each put in. So OSEG, 152 million, City 210. OSEG's expected to put in another 40, mostly from operational losses is how this works. If there's operational losses, they put that in there. And at the end of the 30-year agreement, it would be 216.5 million. At the end of that extra 10 years, it would be 468 million, again, minus some of the equity. The city has never talked about the city's equity in a negative fashion. $210 million, we're getting $0 back after that 40 years. And nor our contribution of equity would also not come back. Next slide, please. And this is what the Auditor General found. If you look in his report, the original projections were something that he brought out in his report and said, look, the city was originally projected to get $93 million back in 2012. And then OSEG was going to get 162, and there was a life cycle fund. Now, this is sort of the basis of what is a fair assignment of risk and reward, as you probably read in the report, under the waterfall. Well, that original 2012 deal was the one that the Auditor General at the time had been looking at and said, this looks like a fair risk to reward. Then that changed. City's funding went to $0. OSEG's funding went to 359 million. And then we're asking ourselves, does this ensure that the public has a strong chance of repayment of invested capital? And in this case, it clearly does not. That changed. Next slide, please. So city staff have been making these arguments about it, and I understand the arguments. One is that OSEG's best business decision would be to default under the current terms. And the second is that if OSEG leaves, we're on the hook for continuing operational costs. But the first point should be really referenced. It doesn't look like OSEG's about to leave. There's a forthcoming potential deal in the works, as you know, on the north side stands. The profit made from those other transactions outside the waterfall still exists. The sponsorship, for example, some of the other teams that are not part of the original deal.
1 minute.
There are city influence here, and $152 million in equity into the deal prevents them from, would likely prevent them from leaving. And then we also used assumptions in the calculations of those operational losses on the city side that are very pessimistic. We said that there'll be no teams, even though we're 50% owners of the teams. We said there's going to be a massive reduction in events. We're talking about retail subleases being taken over by the city, and principal and interest repayment of the retail loan and the loan for arena. The loan for arena is paid regardless. But these were very pessimistic terms. So under those terms, anybody looking at this would just say, well, of course, you don't want those things to happen. But the reality of the situation is the city would never let that occur. We wouldn't be in that situation. And they made these predictions out to 2066. So with those very, very negative assumptions, of course, the other portion looks much more attractive.
You can wrap up, Councillor. Your time is up.
Attractions.
If you could just wrap up, your time is up.
Sure, and just if you could just go to the next slide, please. So what should the city do? You know, I think we should provide some short-term benefit or relief. The life cycle fund makes sense. Some of the changes around the piece around the retail. Sorry.
Councillor, sorry, your time is up. Okay, other speakers?
Can I just finish on wrap-up then, or?
Well, that's what you only have one chance. We're back in council now. We're not in committee of the whole.
Sure. So I'll finish up on wrap up on the motion.
Okay. So, and Mr. Kanellakis, question to you. Could you offer some comment on the slides you've just seen in terms of any inaccuracies?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just seen the slides the first time. They weren't shared with staff, so I'm just assessing it as I see each slide. And you know, unfortunately, the slides paint a picture which don't provide the full context, which I believe staff have provided in the report and in the FEDCO meeting, and in numerous questions that Councillor Menard asked staff. In fact, we had 53 written questions to staff from Councillor Menard that we've answered, including meetings with myself and Steve Box and Councillor Menard, and the CFO and Deputy Treasurer with Councillor Menard, in addition to the other meetings he's had. So we've gone to great lengths to explain these things. And I think that one of the key things that I want to point out and go back to, and I certainly don't want to be debating because that's not what I'm doing. I just want to point out clarification for the members of council that didn't attend FEDCO that day, or that may be reading these slides and not having the complete picture that we presented the other day. I go back to what council, in my PowerPoint presentation, what council, when they approved the deal with Lansdowne, at Lansdowne with OSEG, they had several financial objectives. One of them was operating the stadium and parking garage without having to fund these through tax dollars. Check. We haven't had to fund them through tax dollars. Not funding, number two, not funding the capital life cycle replacement cost for the stadium and parking garage through tax dollars. We have not had to put any life cycle dollars into it. That's all been on OSEG. Having the debt servicing and the capital expenditures for the stadium and parking garage funded through incremental taxes generated by the site and cost avoidance. And that's in fact what's happened. Before Lansdowne was there, we were paying millions of dollars to maintain that site and getting nothing in return. The incremental taxes that we've received from the residential and the tax base that increased on that site has actually paid for the debt for the stadium and the parking garage. And I think one thing that's left out is the $138 million that the city actually borrowed to fund the stadium and the parking garage is being paid back completely by new taxes and will be completely paid back at the end of the term, the original term, including interest. And I think that's an important part to remember, that the city will have these new facilities, paid off by the incremental tax dollars because of development on the site. And so, you know, the issue around equity and what the city has not invested any equity in that site. The expectation that, you know, when you compare it back to the original financial statements and you look at the statements going forward, our base case was based on the assumptions from the original financial statements going forward. And as Isabel Jasmine, our Deputy Treasurer, has said, there is no expectation that we're going to get any kind of return on participation rent as we're sitting right now going forward. So it's a moot point. The issue around whether OSEG walks away from the deal, I mean, that's only for them to answer. But I have to put it before council that a reasonable person would assume, and I'll put it in these terms: if you or I was to put $1,000 into an investment, and someone said to you, you're not going to get after, and you thought you were going to get 8% return on your investment over a number of years, and someone says to you after year 4 or 5, 6, you're never going to see your $1,000 again. That $1,000 is gone. And then someone says to you, I want you to invest another $300 into the same investment, but we're not doing anything to make sure you get back that $300. At some point, you have to make a decision, regardless of your financial status, of whether you're going to be prepared to continue to invest in something where there's no return back to you. And what OSEG is asking for now is more time to be able to recoup at least some interest. They won't get back their equity that they invested, as Isabel just told you. They're going to get back the differential in terms of the interest. It's not all of it. And it puts them at least in a better shape. And even with those losses and the prospect that they're going to invest another $40 million into this partnership, which no one else, I believe, would do, private, nonprofit, even the city would have to think about it. They're still prepared to do it as long as they know as a partnership that at least there's some hope to get back some of their money. And more importantly, they can bring in an equity partner to help them refinance the loan that's coming due in 2 years, which is $106 million. If they don't refinance that loan in part or in whole, that has to come out of the partnership. So $40 million plus whatever the differential will be in that loan. So when we looked at the whole case, a rational person would have to assume, and everybody I've talked to that has expertise in this area tells me that, and Mr. Greenberg hasn't told me this, but tells me that they would be better off walking away if the city doesn't lend them a hand than rather staying in and continuing to pour operating dollars to fund their operating deficits from their pockets as partners versus walking away from the equity they invested. I don't believe it's a bluff. I believe it's what a rational business person would do. I think any one of us as individuals, even if we had our little $1,000 investment, would do the same thing. So we've taken great lengths to explain this and to present all the information before council, and we believe the council has all the information required to make a decision. And my last point, Mr. Mayor, is that they have been losing money since the beginning, but this has accelerated since March, since COVID hit. They are losing money every day. These are real dollars. These are real people losing real dollars. And the losses are mounting and mounting and mounting, and there's no end in sight based on where we're going into 2021. And I think that is what we need to be concerned about, because the city up to this point has been protected from all those losses. We have not had to put another penny into that operation. And if we were with a nonprofit or someone else, they would have either walked or the city would have to subsidize those losses a long time ago when they started losing money from years 1 and 2. And so right now we're sitting in a place where we've been protected. We want to continue to be protected, and we want to continue maintaining the risk profile over on OSEG and not on the city, because right now we don't have the risk. But there needs to be a rebalancing of that of the risk, because it's swung too far over to our partner. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Greenberg, comment from you on anything you've heard here today. And my sense is that this motion, in essence, would kill the Lansdowne deal. Is that a fair assessment if this was passed?
Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity to speak, although I'm being urged by my colleagues to probably bite my tongue and not say very much. I just saw Councillor Menard's presentation for the first time. There are so many inaccuracies in there. I wish he would have presented it ahead of time so we'd have a chance to just show him where things were wrong. It's just completely wrong. And as city manager has just pointed out, it left out a lot of positive things. The essence of the deal back from the beginning was that there was a balancing of risks and rewards to all the parties. The city is continuing to get all of its investment in Lansdowne back through the increased realty taxes that were generated from the project, together with the sale of the air rights back at the very beginning. The city sold condo air rights and office air rights that, quite frankly, OSEG created through the planning process, but the city received those rewards. And the city was spending $3 to $5 million a year to maintain Lansdowne as it then was. So right off the top, the city over the last 10 years that we've been at this has saved itself $30 to $50 million in total. None of that appears in the analysis that you've seen today. So I think the city manager has positioned it well. He has said that there needs to be a continuing good faith on the part of both sides. This is a partnership. We've indicated that with COVID now hitting us in an incredible way, we've lost all of our business. The mass gatherings, as everybody knows, can't take place, and we lost the CFL football season. I'm not sure we're going to get an OHL season in. So we're looking to our partner to help us. And it's not a handout. We're not asking the city to give us any money. It's to allow us to do a bunch of things that we need to do to try to right the ship, and to have a committee working on to report back to City Council by the end of next June on the aspects of Lansdowne that we can all work collaboratively together to try to fix things. But we need the lifeline now. We're bleeding with all of the cuts that have come about because of COVID. I think the requests that we've made are very reasonable. I think the city report looked at all the risks and presented a balance of base, aggressive, and pessimistic views, and it's all in the city report there. So that's the city administration that looked at it independently from what we said. So those are my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Thank you very much. That puts it all in perspective. Councillor Deans on the motion or the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to start to Mr. Kanellakis, because Mr. Kanellakis, when you spoke, you said the city has invested no equity in that site. And I don't know how you got there, because to my knowledge, the city has invested $210 million in that site.
Oh, sorry, I'm just on mute. Mr. Mayor, I guess the issue has to be in terms of we invested in the sports stadium and the parking garage, where there was a debt that was taken out, which is paid by the taxes. So we see that differently than the equity that OSEG put into the site to develop that site, their own equity, which you're getting back. When you look at the chart that was presented at FEDCO, the equity that the city has under its column is zero.
But you would acknowledge that the city has invested on that 40-acre site $210 million of taxpayers' money.
Which is being repaid by the incremental tax increases. That's right.
Yeah.
The city board.
In fairness, we don't look at new developments anywhere in the city and say, well, that's an investment because they're paying back in tax increases. Tax increases also go to pay costs associated with the site.
The city did not put any cash into that site, any of its own direct cash. It borrowed money for the stadium and the parking garage.
Yeah, but borrowing money that's on the books is still taxpayers' money. We're still responsible for it.
It's not considered equity in the pure sense of what you're describing, Councillor.
Well, I don't know. If you borrow $210 million and invest it in a site and the taxpayers have to pay it back, sounds like an investment in the site to me. But I mean, maybe we're just wordsmithing. Just a few things. One, I wanted to thank Mr. Greenberg and Mr. Dowdy for the time that they spent with me answering my questions. And I certainly appreciate the position that they're in, especially in terms of the short term and the impacts of COVID on that site. I mean, we know that the impacts of COVID are real and endless in the city, and many businesses have been impacted. And there's no doubt that that this business has also been significantly impacted. And that's why I can understand why they would come and ask for some of the short-term things like the access to the capital reserve that they made the contributions to. That makes sense to me. What I have a lot harder time with is making today, under the guise of the pandemic, really long-term decisions about the future of Lansdowne without having set up the working group, without having a lot more information and knowledge than we have today. And this will have long-term ramifications for this city for a long time. And that's why I think council would be well advised to be cautious in terms of making the decisions. And I don't believe that they all need to be made at this point. So I would suggest to council that you perhaps vote for 1D, which would give them access to short-term funds, and let the working groups do their work and come back with a lot greater analysis of the site before you make longer-term decisions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak before Councillor Fleury? Have you already spoken?
Well, Mr. Mayor, there's been a presentation from a colleague, an intervention by the partner, and then our
Well, I know,
city
but if you've spoken already once, you only get to speak once, which you did, I believe. So anyone would like
Mr.
to
Mayor,
speak who hasn't spoken?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question on the...
Sorry, Councillor, you know the rules. It's 5 minutes and you had your time. So we're now on to people who have not spoken, and then to Councillor Menard to wrap up. Anyone else wish to speak who has not spoken? Okay, Councillor Menard, the floor is yours to wrap up on your motion.
Just Mayor, just on this, I think each councillor had 5 on the audit, 5 on the regular item. So Councillor Fleury would be in order, would we not? I thought we said that at the beginning.
You're on wrap up now, Councillor. I've ruled. Councillor Menard, go ahead.
Yeah, well, like I said, there should be
the
extra
clock
time
is ticking.
allotted.
It's your time.
Sure. So let me just respond to some of what the city manager said. Mr. Greenberg says, "Well, there's these pieces in this report that he doesn't agree with." Well, name them then. None of that was named in there, and I took that information from the report and from information passed from staff. So if there's something specific in there that's wrong, by all means, point it out, but don't just say the whole thing is ludicrous. The city manager mentioned, well, if you had $1,000 and you asked to invest an additional $300, but you're not doing anything to get back the $300, would you do it? Like they're just doing this out of charity. And I'm sorry, but we're extending spaces at $1 a year for 10 and then 22 years in the case of the retail. We're giving up millions of future revenue without any business plan whatsoever of how to fix the long-term issues. Because it's not just COVID. This site, since the very get-go, has had problems in non-game days and has had issues with the retail site, the big box stores that were put in. And OSEG will admit that too. And so it's not just that we're trying to stem a short-term piece. These are long-term changes that are giving up City of Ottawa revenue. And quite frankly, it feels like we're being negligent as a city. Our responsibility is to our residents, first and foremost. That's who we're responsible to. And in this case, it doesn't feel like that at all. And so the other piece that came up, no one else would become a partner. That was said by the city manager. The city has no idea. It hasn't done the analysis. It hasn't even tried to look at an opportunity. The city is saying to us, well, look, if these guys could run and they could leave even after we give them a deal. Well, then wouldn't you, as a prudent manager of this, say we better make sure we've got a backup plan to mitigate any issues? That's not being done. Why not? And so the motion that I've got in front of us would do that. It would allow the short-term piece and extend the deal for 10 years with conditions, such as a business plan, such as a value for money audit. And OSEG's not leaving with that piece there. The other piece that you mentioned is tax increment financing. Well, tax increment financing is very suspect. To say that you're building something on a site and that those taxes are paying just directly for that site ignores the need to pay for other city services like garbage and snow clearing right across the city. That's not how those things work. And in this case, that's the way we did it with Lansdowne, but it is certainly not the way that it's supposed to work. And so on the tax increment financing arguments that are being made, assigning 75% of the potential realtor taxes when we're giving up all those other pieces around city services that are supposed to be funded, that housing would have been built anyway. And so that's another big problem with this. And I guess at the end of the day, what we're looking at here is, Lansdowne Park, residents outside experts warned the city about this when the deal was first hatched. But we went ahead anyway at that time. And now we're coming back to some of the risks that are coming home to roost. And we're going to take on more risks here today, potentially, without doing our due diligence and with something being rushed through with no consultation of the public, no consultation of the local councillor in advance of these things happening. It is being pushed through. And we're doing this again, a new deal that more deeply entangles the city. And there's no guarantee this deal will be anything more than a minor stopgap, and they'll be back again asking for this in this piece. I've been working with them very closely on many other pieces of this deal to try to make this site as successful as possible, because we all want it to succeed. But we can't just say that we want it to succeed and not do our due diligence and mitigate the city's risks, which the Auditor General has pointed out at the beginning of this meeting. Those risks on the long term, they're not being mitigated. They're not being looked at all. So don't barrel ahead with this deal. Make sure we're doing our due diligence and give them what they need over time, but do the due diligence. All right? Don't just say, yes, we're going to approve a 22-year extension and a 10-year extension and hope it all works out, because that's what's happening here. I urge my colleagues, please support this motion and support Councillor Gower's motion as well. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. Just to wrap up, a couple of comments. First of all, thank you, Ken Hughes, our City Auditor General, for your distinguished service and your long time with the city, not just as Auditor General, but before that as Deputy Treasurer. We wish you the best in your next phase of your life, and all the best over the holiday season for you and your family. I also want to thank Roger Greenberg. I was very, as always, impressed with his presentation and his diplomacy. I think this has been probably the most frustrating file that you have dealt with as a business person. Your character is besmirched from time to time. And I very much admire the work that you've done for this project. And this has been, as you pointed out, a labor of love. This is not some get-rich-quick scheme that you and your partners invested in thinking you were going to, turn out to be a massive payoff. There are some people around this council table that just do not want Lansdowne to succeed, plain and simple. I ran 2 campaigns out of my 3 for mayor against the councillor and then the former councillor, and I got a very strong mandate. I won virtually every poll in both of those elections, including the poll where the individual lived and the residents of Homewood Avenue. The public like Lansdowne. 20 million visitors, 1,000 full-time jobs, 2,500 part-time jobs, greater opportunity for green space, trees, children's playground, skate park, skating rink, basketball court, community garden, the beautiful horticulture and Aberdeen Pavilion, 2 of the most used and rented buildings in all of the city of Ottawa. And I am proud to be associated with that particular project. There are some people that, quite frankly, will never please. We'll constantly move the yardstick or the goalpost every time we agree to something. And I commend Councillor Gower for the motion that he brought forward to broaden the stakeholders because this is really a citywide facility. It happens to be located in one neighborhood, but it really is a citywide facility and should be treated as such. I would strongly urge you, if you want to kill Lansdowne, you vote for this motion, plain and simple. If you want to just kill the whole deal and we end up with everything with none of the benefits, then you vote for this. But I would strongly urge you, send a signal to those partners in the private sector and those individuals who have put blood, sweat, tears, and money into this facility. Stop the nonsense of spreading this ridiculous notion that this is a bailout. As Steve Kanellakis so forcefully said, the reality is that when Lansdowne was just a cruddy old parking lot with bad asphalt and rundown buildings, we were losing $3 to $4 million a year. Because guess what? Not a lot of people wanted to book cruddy old buildings. The Coliseum building, remember the International Food Bazaar building, the old curlodromes? They were a mess. Now it's a destination spot. Yes, we need more density on the site to make it even more vibrant. But the reality is that we are generating $6 million a year in property tax revenue, which we never had before. We had a grand total of $0 in property tax prior to this. So please support this. Je pense que ce projet de Parc Lansdowne.
I think that this Lansdowne project is excellent for the ratepayers, for the neighbors of Lansdowne, and of course for visitors to the national capital.
And the Grey Cup and the NHL Outdoor Classic and the Farmers Market and the United Way kickoff campaign and so many other great events that took place at that site and the sense of pride it brought to us as a community. So I feel I have a very strong mandate. The people I talk to in the Glebe and Old Ottawa South really love the site. Is it perfect? Of course not. But let's build on that great success and make it even better in the future. So I'd encourage you, please don't vote to kill Lansdowne Park, the revitalization. Vote against the Menard motion, yeas and nays.
Councillor Deroux.
Sorry, which motion are we voting on? Is it the Menard motion?
This is the Menard motion.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor El-Shantiri.
No.
Councillor Gower.
No.
Councillor McKenney.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier.
No.
Councillor Harder.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
No.
Councillor Moffat.
No.
Councillor Fleury.
No.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Councillor Fleury?
No.
Merci. Councillor Kavanagh.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
No.
Councillor Kitts.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Deans.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli.
Councillor Shirelli?
Not here, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Suds.
No.
Councillor Eglai.
No.
Councillor Menard.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
No.
7 yeas, 16 nays.
Okay. Next is a motion by Councillor Gower, seconded by Councillor Fleury. Carried.
Carried. Carried.
And on the report as amended.
Carried.
Carried.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to just
Excuse me, not on the report as amendment. I'm voting against it.
Yeah, yeas and nays, please, Mayor.
Yeas and nays.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to
Yes.
separate out item 1D from the rest of the report.
So you want to, okay, so everything but 1D at this point, yeas and nays have been called on.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of order, Jean Cloutier here. I think we also have to approve the Auditor General's
Yes.
Lansdowne.
Yeah, I was coming to that.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have a request. Could we transcribe the same votes as the last one?
Yes.
Is that agreeable? Okay. Agreed on that.
Mr. Mayor.
And Councillor Deans, would you like to dissent on D?
No, I'd like to agree with D.
Okay, so on item D, carried?
Carried.
Carried, okay.
Agree, sorry.
And that covers it all, Madam Deputy Clerk?
Just the Auditor General's waterfall audit.
That lies down. So on the waterfall report by the Auditor General on page
Carried.
26, carried?
Carried.
Okay. Next is item 23, midterm governance review, examen de mi-mandat de la structure de gestion. We have a number of motions, so we'll get the motions tabled first. So if you just introduce your motion and not speak to it, and we'll just come back to them as you put your hand up. So the first one is moved by myself, signed by Councillor Suds. Whereas a general practice formalized as part of the 2009 midterm governance review report, the midterm review is also a regular opportunity for members of council to review their membership on standing committees and other council bodies and to make any changes to same. And whereas Councillor Jenna Suds has advised the mayor and city clerk that she will be stepping down as chair of CPS effective upon appointment of her replacement. Whereas the city clerk has undertaken a circulation to seek expressions of interest from members of council interested in being considered for appointment by council to replace Councillor Suds as chair of CPSC. Whereas the clerk's office has received 2 expressions of interest for chair of CPSC, being Councillor Matthew Luloff and Councillor Catherine McKenney, both of whom are already members of CPSC. Therefore, be it resolved that council consider and approve one of the following members for appointment as chair of CPSC. One, alphabetically, Councillor Luloff, and second, Councillor McKenney. So we'll move on that. Next is Councillor Menard, participation of mayor in debate. Councillor Menard, if you'd like to introduce your motion.
Yes, thank you. And if you could just put it up on the screen as well. I'll start though. Whereas subsection 1.1 of the City of Ottawa's procedure bylaw, being bylaw number 2019-8, provides that Robert's rules of order are to be followed for the proceedings of council and the committees, commissions thereof, and the conduct of its members with the city's rules of procedure are silent on a particular matter. And whereas Robert's rules of order state the following in regard to the chair of an assembly participating in debate. This should rarely be done, and nothing can justify it in a case where much feeling is shown and there is a liability to difficulty in preserving order. If the chairman has even the appearance of being a partisan, he loses much of his ability to control those who are on the opposite side of the question. There is nothing to justify the unfortunate habit of some chairmen have constantly speaking on questions before the assembly, even interrupting the member who has the floor. One who expects to take an active part in debate should never accept the chair, or at least should not resume the chair after having made his speech until after the pending question is disposed of. And whereas the provisions of the city's current procedure bylaw on the chairing of council do not align with this approach, and whereas although section 4 of the procedure bylaw governing the participation of mayor in debate does allow for some greater latitude than what is outlined in Robert's Rules of Order, the current practice nevertheless deviates from subsection 4.1 of the procedure bylaw as well, which states the following. The mayor may state relevant facts and the mayor's position on any matter before the council without leaving the chair, which may take place immediately before the vote, but it shall not be permissible for the mayor to move a motion or debate a question without first leaving the chair. And whereas the current practice is for the mayor to move motions, to contribute substantive arguments to the debate of motions, and to both state his position and encourage members to support his position immediately prior to the vote, and without leaving the chair. And whereas the procedure bylaw should be revised to provide greater clarity and consistency with respect to this rule and the current practice, therefore be it resolved that the following amendments be made to document 7, proposed amendments to the procedure bylaw. 1, the mayor may state relevant facts on the mayor's position on any matter before the council without leaving the chair, which may take place immediately prior to the vote, or should the mover of a substantive motion wish to reply pursuant to section 47 prior to the mover's wrap-up. 2, it shall be permissible for the mayor to move a motion or debate a question without first leaving the chair unless a member of council requests that the chair be seated. And 3, if the mayor desires to leave the chair to move a motion or to take part in the debate, the mayor shall call on the member designated as deputy mayor pursuant to section 5 to preside until the mayor resumes the chair, and the mayor shall assume a seat reserved for a councillor.
Okay, thank you. So the next motion is also by Councillor Menard and seconded by Councillor King.
Yes, and I understand that these next two motions, Mayor, may be referred to the end of term governance piece before the next term. So if that is to be the case, I don't need to read them into on the floor. I can bring them at the end of term if it's for these two motions.
Well, the deputy clerk has suggested you withdraw them and bring them forward at the end of the term.
Okay, I'll do that for these next two.
Okay, thank you.
This one.
And then you have another one
yes.
on Indigenous land acknowledgement, if you'd like to introduce that.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Whereas in 2018, Ottawa City Council made a formal commitment to reconciliation and approved the city's first reconciliation action plan. And whereas the 2018 reconciliation action plan opens with a recognition of Algonquin territory, stating that we recognize that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We also recognize and respect the cultural diversity that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people bring to the City of Ottawa. And whereas in accordance with Action 2 under Education and Awareness Building within the 2018 Reconciliation Action Plan report, the City has incorporated acknowledgements of Algonquin unceded territory at the opening of City organized events. The Council has not formally extended such acknowledgements to meetings of Council. And whereas this recognition should not only inform a Reconciliation Action Plan, but should inform all work of Council, regardless of where or by what means Council is meeting. And whereas this recognition should therefore not only be made in the context of a Reconciliation Action Plan, but should be made whenever Council is conducting business, therefore be it resolved the following amendments be made to Document 7, proposed amendments to the Procedure Bylaw 2019-8, regular and special City Council meeting, 29 agenda in Council. The clerk shall, under the direction of the Mayor, prepare for the use of the members at the regular meetings of Council an agenda under the following headings. A, Indigenous land acknowledgement, changing the previous A to B, and so on. And be it further resolved that the Office of the City Clerk work with the Gender and Race Equity, Inclusion, Indigenous Relations, and Social Development Service to develop appropriate language to be used by the Mayor at each City Council meeting, beginning with the first meeting in 2021, and that may also be used by any committee chair where they deem appropriate.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a direction from Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Kavanagh, if you'd like to introduce your direction. I believe it's from you. Your name's not on it here. I think it's
yes, well, this.
No, it's Councillor Kavanagh, Councillor Menard.
Yes, I just want to make a clarification with Manager Gray first. Just a question to clarify for the public, and this is in terms of the movement of making Indigenous gender and equity as an optional, to be optional in reporting in the implications. So to clarify for the public, it's my understanding that if Council approves this section, it will be expected that Indigenous gender and equity will be completed in staff reports where it is applicable. The training will be available in Q1 to support report authors in completing this section, and that all sections of the report template will be reviewed at full governance.
Ms. Gray, is that acceptable?
Yes, that is correct.
Yes. So my direction to staff is that staff from Gender and Race Equity, Inclusion, Indigenous Relations, and Social Development Services work with the Council Sponsorship Group for Women and Gender Equity to do a review on the use of the Indigenous Gender and Equity Implications section in Q4 of 2021 to ensure that it is being used appropriately by staff and determine if additional supports are necessary for report authors. And during the review of all the implications sections in the 2022 to 2026 governance review report, staff consider replacing the term optional to mandatory implications section with applicable reports to provide clarity for both staff and the public.
Okay, and Ms. Gray, are you comfortable with that, and the clerk as well?
Yes, I am, Mr. Mayor.
And Mr. Clerk, from a procedural point of view?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we are. Thank you.
Okay, so that direction is moved forward. So we'll go back. We have a number of motions. The first is by myself, seconded by Councillor Suds. Councillor Moffat, do you wish to speak on this or the last item, the direction? I just see your hand up.
Just a general comment and a clarification to staff on the governance in general and the lens thing that we talked about at FEDCO.
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to, first of all, maybe Councillor Kavanagh might want to run the gender equity lens through Henry Roberts' Rules of Order. Apparently they never, Robert's Rules of Order clearly never predicted a female as a chair. And then just on the lens, the climate lens matter. So between FEDCO and today, speaking with staff and with Councillor Menard as well as my vice chair, just wanted to ask staff to provide their interpretation of what that means. I think, I raised some concerns about the term optional. I think the term optional is an inconvenient term, but knowing that after speaking with staff, some more understanding how it will be applied, and it will be applied to pretty much exactly where we want it to be applied, to all the areas where we'll see a significant potential impact from a climate perspective. So if I could just ask staff to provide comments to that and provide that clarity on when it will be applied and how that will impact certain reports.
So, Mr. Mayor, perhaps I'll start to answer the question, and the clerk may choose to add to what I do. I think the result of the changes in the motion are focusing the comments on the most significant long-range planning files that the city will be bringing forward this term of council. This will give us the time between now and the next governance review at end of term to learn how to do this properly. I thought it was quite instructive that Councillor Kavanagh talked about the prep work for the gender and equity lens that has been done. We need to do that same work now for the remaining reports, and we will have the climate lens on every major policy initiative between now and the end of this term. So I think it's on where it matters is really what my advice to council. A lot of other reports in the city are not as significant as it relates to this, and we'll get a training system in place and have people more comfortable with how to use it.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the feedback and response from Andrea Flowers as well with the Climate Resilience Unit. I think it's just important to get that, obviously to get that interpretation from the folks that will be implementing the lens and applying it to our work through the committees and council. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. So now we're back to my motion, seconded by Councillor Suds. Councillor Leeper, you'd like to speak on
Yeah, just
speak on any of the motions, actually.
No, absolutely. A question, a clarification. If the motion passes, then we're going to choose between two councillors for that position. When would that happen? What's the process? Is there a nominating? Well, there's no nominating committee struck.
It's
so
done now. We would vote today.
Oh, we would vote today?
Okay. Today, that's right.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Olshantiri on the motions or the report?
On the motion, Mr. Mayor, just a question to the clerk, and I did have a discussion with the clerk in the past to divvy up this committee, and I know this is not for today's debate, but can we put that on the future of governing report for the next term of council? Because we saw this committee is getting bigger and bigger, and the workload is huge. I recommend we separate the emergency management from the social services, and there was no appetite early, but now we saw how heavy the workload is on one chair to do this. So just on record for the next term of council, maybe we should revisit this committee and the makeup of the committee.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. Okay, anyone else? So we've got we have to now vote on choice between Councillor Luloff and Councillor McKenney. Councillor Meehan, would you like to speak? I just saw your hand go up and then down. Councillor Meehan?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I was hoping to speak on something that's going to come up. So.
Okay, so anyone on this motion before we go to the vote? Councillor Kavanagh?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say a thank you to the former chair, Councillor Sudds, and I see that it's a very demanding job, and I appreciate all that she's done. Through some very busy days. I appreciate that we've had a female chair. I think it's important to continue to consider gender equity in this portfolio. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Okay, so the clerk will do the roll call, and if you wish to support Councillor Luloff, obviously you say Councillor Luloff, and if you wish to support Councillor McKenney, you say Councillor McKenney instead of yay or nay. Is everyone clear on that?
Actually, Mayor, sorry, just a question on Councillor Kavanaugh's. How many women chairs do we have now with Councillor Sudds leaving?
There's Councillor Harder as chair of planning, and help me
I
out
don't
here.
have it off the top of my head.
Councillor Deans is Councillor Deans is chair of Police Services Board.
That's it.
And then how many men?
The remaining members, the remaining committees.
Okay, which is how many?
I don't know. You'll have to look that up yourself. Okay, so roll call's been called.
Sorry, Mayor, point of may I just ask for the motion to be on screen, please? Sorry, I'm just trying to, I'm trying to ascertain here. We haven't voted yet to hold this election.
What I believe the deputy clerk has said that the action that we have to take is the actual vote on the therefore be it resolved.
That we can't, so we haven't passed this yet.
So on the motion, carried? Carried? Right,
Carried.
now we have the action that's required.
And may we speak to the candidacies?
Yes, yeah. No one had their hand up, so go ahead.
Thanks. It's a two-step process in my head. So I just want to say I will be supporting Catherine McKenney as the head of CPSC. I have had the pleasure of working with them for 6 years now, and I do not know anyone other than city staff who have the depth of understanding across our social services spheres that Catherine McKenney does within the city. I rely on them to help me navigate the relatively Byzantine childcare, housing, other social supports that the committee deals with. And we know that in Mayor Watson's councils, the chairs are more than just chairs. They are de facto ministers of the portfolios that are under the purview of those committees. And I think it's really important, if we are appointing a de facto minister in charge of things like housing, childcare, social services, that we put in place the most expert person we can at a time when these issues are absolutely at the fore of the issues that the city faces. So I hope that councillors will make a decision and vote their conscience in favor of the best person I know around this table to address these absolutely critical issues at this juncture, as well as to keep in mind the gender diversity of the chairs of our committees, which is something that I think a lot of people in this city are looking for us to try to maintain the integrity of. So with that, Mayor, thank you for the time.
Great. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, Madam Clerk, if you want to support Councillor Luloff, you mentioned his name. If you want to support Councillor McKenney, you mentioned her name.
Councillor DeRose.
Councillor Luloff.
Councillor Leeper.
McKenney.
Councillor Tierney.
Luloff.
Councillor Hubley.
Luloff.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Councillor Luloff.
Councillor Gower.
Luloff.
Councillor McKenney.
McKenney.
Councillor Meehan.
McKenney.
Councillor Cloutier.
Luloff.
Councillor Harder.
Luloff.
Councillor Luloff.
Suppose I vote for myself.
Councillor Moffat.
Luloff.
Councillor Fleury.
Mr. McKinney.
Councillor Kavanagh.
McKinney.
Councillor Brockington.
Councillor McKinney.
Councillor Kitts.
Luloff.
Councillor Dudas.
Councillor Luloff.
Councillor King.
Councillor McKinney.
Councillor Deans.
Councillor McKinney.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor Suds.
Councillor Luloff.
Councillor Egley.
Councillor Luloff.
Councillor Menard.
Councillor McKinney.
Mayor Watson.
Councillor Luloff.
14, Councillor Luloff. 9, Councillor McKinney.
Next motion is moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dudas. Whereas Council has approved the appointment of Councillor Matt Luloff to replace Jenna Suds as Chair of CPS. Whereas expressing interest in the position of Chair of CPS, Councillor Luloff advised that he would be prepared to step down as Deputy Mayor should he be appointed Chair of CPSC. And whereas in accordance with 2018-2022 governance report and the approach taken over the last 3 terms of Council, Deputy Mayors are recommended to Council by the Mayor. Therefore, be it resolved that Councillor Jenna Suds be appointed to replace Councillor Matt Luloff as Deputy Mayor for the remainder of the 2018-2022 term of Council. Comments? Councillor Dudas, you have your hand up.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to say, we had just had a conversation about the importance of having women in a formative role in our council, and having been the deputy mayor for this past half of term of council, it is more than a symbolic role. It is a role in which we get to respond and work with different departments. We are working on behalf of the city and speaking to all sorts of different groups and representing the city when we're filling in for you. And I think that having a deputy mayor that represents the West End, the South End, and the East End is a strong statement of collaboration around the council table. And I'm in favor of both genders being represented on council's committees and the best people for the job. It'd be wonderful to see another female deputy mayor joining Councillor Jones and I in this role. So I fully support this motion, and I look forward to seeing my council colleagues support it as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Leeper, please.
Thanks. A quick comment to Councillor Dudas's point. It would be great if the deputy mayors, if we intend to have regional representation across the city, could also represent the core of the city. But no, it's east, west, and south. Mayor, I will vote, but I think it would have behooved you to put this to consultation with the members and solicit interest from the members of council to see who might have been interested in this position. This is, not entirely unexpected, but I have to suggest that it's not very collaborative. I think we could have used some canvassing of those who might be interested around the table, since the deputy mayor will join FEDCO automatically. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DeRuse, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I just want to take a moment to thank Councillor Jenna Suds for her work on CPS. I know that she's done an amazing job in the last 2 years, and I know Councillor Luloff will be doing similar job, and I'm very happy for him. And congratulations, Councillor Luloff, and I'm very happy to have Councillor Suds as a deputy mayor with us, serving with myself and Councillor Dudas and yourself. And just a quick comment, Councillor Leeper, to Councillor Leeper. I understand right now with the deputy mayor and including the mayor representing the core, and then you have deputy mayor from west and east and south. I think if you look at around the table, I think it's very well balanced and well representative. So I just want to congratulate my colleague and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing us to make that comment.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Meehan, please. Councillor Meehan.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to avoid missing an item. So no, I really, I don't have anything to say on this item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So on the motion, Carried.
No, Mr. Mayor, we'd like to have ayes and nays on.
Yeas and nays, okay. Yeas and nays have been called on the appointment of Councillor Jenna Suds as Deputy Mayor.
Councillor DeRuse,
Yes.
Councillor Leeper,
No.
Councillor Tierney,
Yes.
Councillor Hubley,
Yes.
Councillor El Shantiri,
Yes.
Councillor Gower,
Yes.
Councillor McKenney,
No.
Councillor Meehan,
No.
Conseil Cloutier, Councillor Harder,
Yes.
Councillor Luloff,
Yes.
Councillor Moffat,
Luloff. Oh, sorry, that was the last. Yes. Yes. Wrong vote.
Councillor Fleury, Councillor Kavanagh,
Yes.
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Kitts,
Oui.
Councillor Dudas,
Yes.
Councillor King,
No.
Councillor Deans,
No.
Councillor Shirelli, Councillor Suds,
Yes.
Councillor Eglai,
Yes.
Councillor Menard,
Councillor Menard.
I think we're on mute. Councillor Menard?
Not there.
He's having a problem with gender equity.
So
Not funny.
Not funny.
I will just check to make sure I'm not having a technical issue.
Sorry.
Oh.
Hello?
Councillor Menard,
Yes.
Mayor Watson,
Yes.
17 yeas, 6 nays.
Okay, thank you and congratulations, Councillors Luloff and Suds. Councillor Menard's motion now is moved by himself, signed by Councillor Meehan, with respect to the mayor's participation in debate. Anyone wish to speak to this? Councillor Brockington?
Thanks, Mayor. Let's just get right into it. Number one, basically, if I read this right, we have debate. The mover of a motion gets wrap up. The mayor, if he so chooses, can have the final word. What this motion now in one says, if the mover of motion wants to have the final word, that would then be permitted. Am I correct with that interpretation?
I think so.
Who are you asking?
City Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, I believe that is the essence of the resolution.
Is that common? Do other municipalities allow the mover to speak after the head of council?
Not to my knowledge, Mr. Mayor, but I have not done an in-depth review of that particular aspect.
So, I mean, we have a free flow of ideas now. We have a structure. So I'm just going to ask Councillor Menard in his wrap up if he could just address that point. And again, the city clerk, if he could clarify, I don't know too many occasions during my tenure here where the mayor has removed himself from the chair's position to debate. And this is part 2 of the motion. So again, could the city clerk just comment on that? This clause would give any member of council the authority to ask the chair to cede the chair position. Is that correct?
Is my understanding, Mr. Mayor. And with regards to subsection 4.1 of the procedure bylaw and the part of the resolution towards the end, which it says, but it shall not be permissible for the mayor to move a motion or debate a question without first leaving the chair. I can say in the last 20 or so years of being the clerk or deputy clerk that is honored more in the breach, as they say. In fact, was pioneered several terms of council ago by a former planning committee chair. So it is something that has not been complied with very often.
So I'll just yield again back to Councillor Menard. What is the problem that we're trying to fix with your motion? You can address that. That will help me out. Thank you.
I'll just wrap up.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Dudas, please.
Just a point of clarification from the city clerk, please. When electors are going to the polls, who are they voting for? They vote for 2 elected representatives. Can you just clarify for me who they are electing?
Mr. Mayor, at the local government level for municipalities, it is the head of council, and more often than not, it is a ward councillor.
Okay, so they're choosing who they want them to be represented at the ward level, but they're also choosing the mayor. And as the head of council, to represent the entire city, and not just one ward, not just one neighborhood, not just one community, but to represent the entire council, to be able to summarize his or her stance, to summarize the discussion that has happened, and to help to find some kind of collaboration around the council table. Is that out of order, Mr. Clerk?
No, Mr. Mayor, it is not.
Okay, so I understand the need for increased collaboration amongst all council members. It'd be wonderful if we could always agree on all things. That won't always come to pass. And once again, sometimes situations get heated, and 100%, we need to make sure that we're always working with a level of decorum. But I recognize that, I represent my ward and other councillors represent their wards. The mayor represents our city. So in that respect, I will not ever even consider supporting this motion. I find it offensive. And I think that my residents who voted for the mayor, regardless who that mayor of that day would be, they want me to work with whomever that mayor would be and to find it so that I can reflect their vote, their choice on council. So I digress.
Great, thank you. Councillor Luloff, please.
Mr. Clerk, I just want to understand the mechanics of this. It is in our governance that we provide 5 minutes of speaking time to introduce a motion, and then also allow for 5 minutes of speaking time for wrap up on a motion. If this passes today, will this be allowing another 5 minutes for a wrap up on the wrap up, meaning that the mover of a motion could have 15 minutes of speaking time on each item that they move?
Mr. Mayor, I don't think that is the intent of the motion, but I do believe that the mover could probably explain it better.
Then I will cede this to Councillor Menard unless he wants to deal with this in wrap up, which I absolutely accept.
Sure. If you have more, Councillor Luloff, I can deal with it. Oh, I see I see Councillor Deans on the list here. So no, that's not the intent. It's not the intent to have multiple wrap ups. The intent is to have one wrap up. And like everywhere else that I've been on a board with Robert's Rules of Order, the mover of a motion gets that wrap up on that last word, rather than another member of council directing people how to vote at the end of everyone else's motions. So that's the change, is that we're trying to usher in, is that if it's your motion and you've brought it, you have the last word as the mover, as has worked in, as I say, every other board I've been on.
Thank you, Councillor Deans. I'm sorry, Councillor Luloff, did you have another question?
No, Mr. Mayor, I'll cede the floor to Councillor Deans.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Deans, please.
You're on mute, Councillor. Councillor Dean, you're on mute.
Sorry. Obviously still haven't got the hang of this. So I just wanted to ask Mr. O'Connor a question about not just the mayor, but committee chairs that are in the chair and moving a motion, because it certainly was our practice for a long time that either a mayor or a chair, if they wanted to move a motion, would not be in the chair for moving that motion, and that the vice chair or the deputy mayor would assume the chair while the chair or the mayor proposed their motion. And that did go on for a long time. And I just wonder how we changed that. believe we ever had a vote to change that I can recall. So has it just slid over time? Because that certainly was the practice, and it was a practice that this council followed for a long time.
Mr. Mayor, as indicated earlier, my recollection is that yes, the subsection has been as it is for many years. Having said that, though, a lot of committee chairs and former mayors have done both practices, have spoken from the chair and moved motions and removed themselves from the chair. So, but as I said, my recollection is that often it's been honored more in the breach that it has not been followed.
Okay, but the actual policy is that we should, if we're chairing a meeting and we're moving a motion, we should remove ourselves from the chair while we present the motion. And while that's being considered. Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other hands to wrap up. Councillor Menard on your motion.
Great, thanks so much, Chair. So the current practice of chairing of council does deviate a bit from our procedure bylaw, which is underpinned by Robert's Rules of Order. And so I'm proposing that we amend that procedure bylaw to better reflect the current practice and minimize deviation from the spirit and text of Robert's Rules. And to be sure, the mayor should, to Councillor Dudas's point, absolutely weigh in on debates before council, especially as the mayor is the only member of council elected citywide, and absolutely expected to provide that perspective and go beyond the potential parochialism of members of council tied to one area of the city. Completely agree with that. However, the chair must also endeavor to act, and it's why we see this in Toronto, and be seen as acting objectively in their duties as chair, as they're ultimately the arbiter of the democratic process at council, including the maintenance of the rules of order. And that's why, to Councillor Brockington's point as well, Robert's rules and our procedure bylaw are clear on the need for the chair to see the chair if they're going to participate in the moving or debate of motions. And given councils generally seemed more amenable to overlooking the formality of the mayor seating the chair when engaging in debate or moving a motion, I do think our bylaw should be updated to reflect this, which is what the bylaw does. It actually updates the bylaw to what the current practice is, but allows a mover of a motion to wrap up without at the end of their motion. And so that said, the use of the chair's ability to have the last word and to use this last word to contribute arguments to a debate and suggestions to members as to how to vote is at odds with the spirit of parliamentary procedure under Robert's Rules, and it undermines the credibility of that position as an objective arbiter of the rules of order and debate. And so in terms of that chairship, our bylaws should be changed to make sure that we ensure members of council are able to realize their right of response under Section 47 of the procedure bylaw. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, in the midst of the world's greatest health pandemic, we're spending a moment on this. It's a moment too long as to when I can speak and where I can speak. This is really makes us look rather foolish, quite frankly. So I'm going to call yeas and nays. I encourage members to defeat the Menard-Meehan motion. It's clear that the councillor in question is concerned that I get the last word because I can clarify and correct a lot of information that sometimes comes out during the debate. I make no apologies for that. I think it's important that members of council have my perspective on this, as you pointed out, the only member elected citywide. So on the Menard motion, I'd encourage you to vote no. Yeas and nays, please.
Councillor DeRuse.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor El Shantiri.
No.
Councillor Gower.
Councillor Gower.
Oh, I'll say it again. No.
Thank you. Councillor McKenney.
Yes.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Conseil Cloutier.
No.
Councillor Harder.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
The irony's killing me. No.
Councillor Moffat.
No.
Conseil Fleury.
Councillor Fleury.
No.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Yes. Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
No.
Councillor Kitts.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Deans.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor Suds.
No.
Councillor Eglai.
No.
Councillor Menard.
Yes.
Mayor Watson.
No.
7 yeas, 16 nays.
Okay, on to the next motion, also by Councillor Menard, Indigenous Land Acknowledgement at council meetings. Councillor Menard, if you'd like to introduce it. I think you've introduced it. You'd like to speak to it, I believe.
Yes, I have introduced it, but I did want to. I don't need to speak to it. I don't think the motion speaks for itself. I do want to make sure that there is a direction to staff to consult on this motion in terms of the nothing about us without us decree, and so it would be helpful given that we're looking to change practice. Mr. O'Connor's helpfully provided that direction.
Okay, I'd like to move a referral motion, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Suds. Whereas City Council has adopted a formal structure the city has in place to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Action Plan, whereas it's important to honor the principles and the collaborative relationship and the good work of the formal process that is in place to consult on this issue, and whereas the city has a duty to look at this with the Indigenous community in consultation with the broad-based community and not assume we know best. Therefore, be it resolved that the Menard-McKenney motion on land acknowledgement be referred to staff and that staff be directed to consult with the city's Aboriginal Working Group and the broader Indigenous community and report back to FEDCO and Council with a recommendation as early as possible in 2021 following consultation. So my understanding is that the office that we have established has not been consulted on this. So this simply brings it to the formal group of women and men who are kind enough to sit on the city's Aboriginal Working Group to ask for their input and consultation, and particularly with the chiefs of the Algonquin Nation as well, because we do have a protocol in place and we'd like to not surprise them with this motion, but ask for their input. I'm sure they'll be very appreciative and welcoming, and I think this is the more proper process to follow, so we don't simply assume that this is something that the First Nations community would like. Councillor Moffat on referral.
Thank you. Just to clarify, obviously this is a motion that's being brought forward through our midterm governance review. Just want to confirm that this is in fact something that can be done outside of the formal governance review process. Yes, because the direction is to come back to council in January with a recommendation after we've consulted the Aboriginal Working Group. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to staff. I just want to make sure that through this process, when it does come back, that Councillor Menard does get credit for the motion and for bringing this to us. I don't want to see it slipped into a report somewhere and credit redirected. So can I just find out from staff how we will see that come back, and what would be the assurance that we would have that Councillor Menard would get credit for having raised this?
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we would be bringing back the report through FEDCO, working with our colleagues. And we would also, in the background section of most reports, we put the origins of the particular motion that originated from it. So it would be included there.
So it would not come back as a report from someone else. It would come back as a report from staff, and it would be very clear that this was put forward by Councillor Menard. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other comments on referral? On the referral motion, carried. Adopté.
Carried.
On the governance report as amended.
Carried.
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 Next is Ottawa Ward Boundary Review 2020 recommendations and report. We have quite a few. I believe 3 motions. Some of them we're going to have to get some clarification on because they seem to contradict one another. So first one is future ward boundary reviews, moved by Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Moffat, and I know Councillor El Shantiri was deeply involved in this as well. Councillor Harder, if you'd like to maybe move the motion or read the be it resolved, whatever you'd like to do.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Well, we know that this report has caused a lot of interest, certainly in the city, recommending the realignment into 24 wards. And whereas our decisions may last for 3 or possibly 4 municipal elections, so possibly till 2034, and know that we continue to have really high growth areas in the city, but not limited, including but not limited to fast growing areas of Barrhaven and Cumberland. There may be variances in locations and or rates of growth from what is forecasted in the Ottawa Ward Boundary Review. So this recommends future councils that staff be directed to review population and growth numbers every 4 years, beginning in 2024, to determine whether population figures have varied sufficiently from the projections to warrant a scoped ward boundary review, including but not limited to Cumberland and Barrhaven wards RW6, RW8, and RW9 as adopted by City Council at its meeting December 9th, or as possibly adopted, I guess, since we haven't adopted it yet. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. It's great to see you back, Councillor Harder. Just to remind members of council, we have the consultants who did the review with us available for questions or comments. That's Beat Bowron and Gary Davidson and Russell Matthew, as well as our own staff from the city. The next motion, future boundary reviews, boundary between Overbrook and Vanier. Now, this is moved by Councillor King and seconded by Councillor Fleury. Just so I'm clear, Councillor Fleury, you had the old Vanier issue changed on item D, right? You're still supportive of that?
You mean the motion that was brought forward at FEDCO, Mr. Mayor?
Yes. Yeah. Is that that deals with your problem, if I'm not mistaken?
Correct. So based on the consultant's approach, I brought forward that motion, and thank you, Councillor Dudas, for moving it.
And I think the consultant supported it, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Okay. But I am also supportive of both the motions that Councillor King is bringing.
Okay. So Councillor King, if you'd like to introduce your 2 motions, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you know, the community of Overbrook is a special one. It's one that I call home. Overbrook residents don't dispute the fact that our neighbor Vanier is a community of interest. We appreciate their culture, their unique history, the importance of the Francophone heritage, and their wish to see their historical border protected. But it's also the wish of Overbrook residents that that area, that Overbrook is extended the same courtesy. There is a tremendous amount of history to the Overbrook neighborhood. The first references to Overbrook occurred in 1911 with 3 key streets commemorating the new King George and Queen Mary, which is where Overbrook gets the name of 2 of her main streets. They had visited in 1901 and ascended the throne in 1910, and Overbrook was annexed by the city of Ottawa on January 1st, 1950. However, many historians agree that the community became a police village in its own right in 1922, which means Overbrook will be turning 100 years old in 2 years' time. And we're looking pretty good for being that old. But I give you this history to demonstrate that Overbrook is a distinct community of interest in and of itself. And many of the residents of Overbrook and the Community Association who have written to me and who've written to many of you over the past few days and even within the past few hours simply do not understand why the use of a main arterial road has to be the reason why the communities will be sliced and diced into one another. Community identity A community and identity are shaped by many factors, and the boundaries between Vanier and Overbrook have worked well for more than 70 years. Moving this boundary to Donald Street does not make sense and truncates the community, moving nearly 20% of its residential area into another ward. The local community resource center uses the boundaries of the ward as its catchment. And as I had said in speaking to a different motion, we are dealing with major issues, especially social issues, where 50% of the children within this area of the ward are within poverty. They and the community associations are invested in their neighbors and have been working hard to help them be connected with social services and resources. They don't want to see their neighbors moved to a different ward. Finally, the suggestion of a boundary shift came from the consultants after public consultation on the original option, which did not incorporate the new boundary shift. So the community saw the boundaries as is in the summer, and then they shifted. This is not right or fair or proper consultation for affected communities. The difference between moving the boundary is about 200 meters in either direction. If the purpose of the boundary review was predominantly to maintain voter parity, this change does not make a difference in population size. A difference of less than 2,000 people in either direction where Rita Rockcliffe is well within the tolerances. The community members feel strongly about their identity and are angry that they did not have the opportunity to be consulted. Using MacArthur as a boundary does not work for Vanier, and using Donald Street as the boundary does not work for Overbrook. It should not be zero-sum for either communities. We should not be hamstrung into a boundary that does not work for either community for the sake of tidy borders. So that's why I'm urging colleagues to please support this motion to leave the southern boundary between the two historic communities as outlined in my motion. I know that the mayor was asking me to speak to the Cardinal Glen motion. I did have that as separate, and I presented these motions separately because both communities have massive concerns about the way that the option 6 has been redrawn, and they wanted to have that full fair hearing for both communities.
Okay, thank you. To our consultants, I believe you've seen the motions now, or you hopefully have. Would these changes stand up at the LPAT? What's your position on the motion by Councillor King on both the Cardinal Glen and the Overbrook issues, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, we appreciate that nobody does like change, but the purpose of the Ottawa Ward Boundary Review is supposed to bring forward new boundaries that achieve effective representation. And in addition to voter parity and not dividing neighborhoods, clear, logical boundaries are the third among the most important components of effective representation. Option 6 left the boundaries of Vanier as they are now. But there were lots of comments during the round 2 of the public consultation that said that those were bad boundaries. They are running through property lines, backyards, and people were confused. Regarding the Overbrook situation, the boundary that the final report recommended runs along MacArthur Avenue, and therefore it does not divide Overbrook. Regarding Cardinal Glen, the change in the ward boundary does not prevent members of the Cardinal Glen community to work cooperatively with Manor Park. Manor Park is to the north, separated from Cardinal Glen by the big cemetery. That happens all the time. Community associations cooperate. But the current boundary divides the community in two. So in this instance, two components of effective representation are not met from our point of view. One is the not dividing a community or a neighborhood, and the other one is to have a clear boundary. We believe that in order to achieve effective representation, the recommended boundaries should be maintained. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, questions and comments? Councillor Fleury.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I obviously second the motion because the current boundaries do reflect Vanier and Overbrook. I just have a question for the consultants, because when option 6 was presented, I raised concern as a local councillor for Vanier in identifying amenities of Vanier that were south of MacArthur. And Councillor King and I's intervention with you was to protect the existing boundary, and you came back with a Donald. So I just want to clarify, when you say option 6 did include Vanier, option 6, which created a southern border of MacArthur, did lose some Vanier amenities. So just for the record, I believe that was discussed and presented at FEDCO.
Mr. Mayor, yeah, just as a response, and in terms of the FEDCO discussion, the suggestion was made because of your concerns about the Vanier community institutions to go south to Donald Street. And we did agree at FEDCO that that was a good boundary, but we then heard subsequently from all the people in Overbrook that in fact Donald divides Overbrook. And given that, our recommendation is to stay with MacArthur.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to clarify what we have on the table is an amended FEDCO report that protected the Vanier amenities, and based on the consultant's recommendation, because they're also Councillor King and I's recommendations was to keep the existing boundaries between Vanier and Overbrook. And the consultants came back, and maybe the clerk can speak to that, because the clerk was privy to Councillor King and I's request initially following the presentation of option 6.
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, I regret to advise that I have nothing to add to this debate at this point in time, because you have the consultant's independent report in front of you.
Okay, anything else, Councillor Fleury? C'est tout?
Well, so Mr. Mayor, just in terms of process, the FEDCO report was amended. So Councillor King's motion today that I support is a further amendment. Is that fair to?
You're entitled to do it, whether it passes or not. That's up to council. But you're entitled to have this motion. It's correctly before us.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a long day, so if I'm asking something that's already been answered, I apologize. So to the consultants, so the motion brought forward by Councillor Harder, that's something you believe is defensible? Should there be an appeal?
Yes, you take us out. You have to unmute us.
Please speak.
Yes. Yes, that's defensible. Of course, council can review their boundaries at any time they wish. And it may be appropriate because, as Councillor Harder has mentioned, the growth in that area is going to be very fast. And so it may be very appropriate to look at it beginning each year, beginning 2 years before the election.
But you have concerns about the other two motions, correct?
Yes, we do.
And the overall report, unamended, as it's in front of us without the motions, you're okay with that report, or you still have some concerns about what was passed at FEDCO?
We have some concerns about Cumberland, if you...
Yes, there were some issues around Cumberland. Our recommendation only moved the area north of Willhaven into the Orleans ward, and the remainder of Cumberland, rural Cumberland, and Osgood ward would be joined together. So we did have some concerns about the Cumberland amendment.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, just to add about mixing suburban and rural residents. That was our main concern, Councillor.
Okay, thank you for that. As I say, it's been a long day, so thank you for that clarification. I think we all need to understand where all the motions fit into the puzzle, so thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Eglai. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just on I'll start with Councillor Harder's motion, just to the city clerk. I understand what's going on here. The population is growing quite substantially, and the need maybe not to wait 15 years to at least come back to look at Barrhaven is why this is before us. Do you anticipate that if the population does grow, that, and it would trigger another mini ward boundary review, it'd be very specific to that ward or the neighboring wards, or do you anticipate we would do another more widespread review like we're just coming out of now?
Mr. Mayor, I think it would be the former, as the council had described it. It would be a very site-specific or scoped ward boundary review, which might include one or two areas.
So would this motion trigger that review every 4 years from now on until the council takes different direction?
Well, again, appreciating, I won't be the clerk years from now, but I think it would be a wise direction for any clerk to take to look at these types of numbers from time to time.
Okay. Just on Councillor King's motions, I just want to share, the feelings within my own ward, and that is the retention of what we have built up over, in his case, 100 years. The sense of community is very important, very hard to quantify, but a very important attribute that people enjoy when they look for a neighborhood to live in. And certainly heard from my own ward that there are communities of interest that have been built up over time within our current ward boundaries that people want to retain or maintain. So, if that criteria is good enough for my ward, it's certainly good enough for other wards as well. And so that's sort of the dilemma I have now, because I completely understand what Councillor King is trying to do for his community, but also appreciating the feedback and information we've got back from our consultants. So I think that one of the great things that makes a community is the sense of belongingness in community that people have where they live, which is very hard to fabricate. It's just there built up over time. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to clarify in terms of the motion from Councillor Harder. It's not limited. It says, but not limited to Cumberland and Barrhaven. So it's if this, because the reason I'm asking is because it's got to look at the intensification. We've got targets of 60% intensification, and I don't think we really know how much that's going to be where. Because it's been very difficult to forecast, and this is something I pointed out earlier with my motion that we put together with Councillor Leeper. So I just wanted to get some comments on that, because that is a concern that I have, and that was what I had raised in terms of that, in terms of our motion.
Mr. Mayor, yes, it's the.
Go ahead.
So yes, we would be taking a fairly broad look at those types of changes in population and in growth. So yes.
Okay. No, I appreciate it, because I do think that it's not, because we're trying to concentrate having more population growth within the belt, I think we have to take a serious look, because we don't know how it's going to pop up all over the place. There's a lot of variances that are still unknown. So no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. Councillor King earlier mentioned annexation. As the representative for Richmond, which was annexed by Goulburn, and then for former Goulburn, which was Glencairn, was annexed by Canada, and then representing parts of Nepean when Jeff Leeper knows all about the annexation of Nepean. Don't get me started. I could go for 3 hours probably. It's an upcoming podcast on annexation, but I want to just a couple comments. One, I support obviously I'm seconding Councillor El Chantieri, and I had spoken quite a bit in the past about rural for rural and things like that, and keeping rural with rural. I think one of the concerns I have is once you depart from that, and I've spoken to Beata and Gary about this a little bit in the recent week. Once you depart from rural with rural and you start to go to that suburban rural combination. I think we get it wrong on Cumberland. I think the residents agree, and I actually think Councillor Kids probably agrees with this too, in that the idea of splitting Cumberland in 3 was never really the idea. It was never really the vision. Unfortunately, it happens because you start to move around the population numbers, and really with Orleans and kind of the Blackburn Hamlet situation, where do you put it? That's what causes you to split Cumberland into 3. I'd like to think that this motion allows that sober second thought to look at that in 4 years from now to say, is this really the right decision? We've already heard from residents in VARs that they're not too happy with it. I think it's kind of well, what about us? You forgot us. You left us behind down here south of Russell Road. So I think those are things where I'd hate to see us make a decision today that lasts for the next 3 elections if it's the wrong decision. The motion allows us to revisit that in 2024 and, if necessary, in 2028, depending how things go. Ultimately, some of the other concerns, I mean, intensification is going to take time. We're not even going to have the zoning bylaw implemented until the end of next term to implement that 60%. And it's the same with the growth that we talked previously in the expansion areas. But I do believe that for the most part, gets it right. I don't support any motions that fiddle with boundaries and move people around. I think we put the consultant in place to make these boundaries based on the principles that they explained. That's why I voted against all the ones before. Of course, I've been historically awful at getting support for my positions in this endeavor for the last year and a half. But so be it. I'll continue that today. But no, I think ultimately the report. I stand by the report that was presented. I stand by the principles that were set out in the report. I don't believe we should support motions that move people around. Ultimately, where you live doesn't change. Who you vote for is the only thing that changes. And Councillor Harder and me and I can attest to how we worked together on the Stonebridge issue, and that worked out incredibly well. I think I represented 11 homes in all of Stonebridge. The other 2 halves were, the 2 halves really were split by Councillor Harder and me, but we all worked together. I mean, that's the reality of what we do. I know many councillors work together when you have these situations. Just last week, I think Councillor Leeper had Councillor Kavanagh in on a public meeting in that McKellar Park area. So this is a reality. I mean, the ward boundary doesn't change that. We will work together, and it's actually bridges those wards together and allows us to work together more collaboratively when it crosses boundaries like that. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. You're very consistent. That's for sure. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to begin by thanking the consultant. It feels like we spent a lot of time together, even from the first boundary review to the second to the third. I must say, I said it to Beata, but I'd like to say it on record here. You handled the meetings very professionally. Thank you very much for listening to all people's concern. And was no idea, in your opinion, was a bad idea. You were there to listen, and you present us with a report. I have to admit it, publicly I agree with Councillor Menard. When it is hard when councillors start tinkering with boundaries to what they feel is the right thing, because it looks in the end we are self-serving each other or helping each other, or just like voting for your own race sometimes if you pay a raise. So I find it, we have a consultant, we get the report from the consultant, we listen to the community, and the principle of keeping rural with rural, it was a sound from the last boundary review in 2005, and that's why we won the day at the OMB and where we are today. I said it before, where you live, it doesn't matter. How big is your ward also doesn't matter, because even with all the changes, I still have the largest ward in the city. And quite honestly, I'm proud of the people we represent in the South March from 2005. Because those people have been voted for me 3 times within 80%. So obviously, if you're a good councillor and you work for the community, they'll vote for you. It doesn't matter where they live or traditionally part of Canada or part of West Carleton. And I was really adamant to support the report the way it is. But when Councillor Kidd spoke to me and Councillor Lula say she went door to door and her resident, mass majority of them, they want to stay with Orly for a reason. Most importantly is the language. They feel more connected to a Francophone community. And I said to Councillor Kids, and I say it today, we are lucky. She's a councillor who lives in a rural area, who's willing to represent the rural area. Her first day on the job said, I want to go back to Agriculture Rural Affairs Committee, and we welcome her there. So I feel comfortable supporting that motion in front of us with given the opportunity for part of Cumberland to go with Osgood, the other part goes with Councillor Kitts, and the small portion will go to Councillor Lula. Do I think in principle that's a good idea? Absolutely not. 8,000 residents in the rural area mixed with 50,000 in the suburban. I don't think that's a fair, you can do the math. But we have council who's willing to work together. And quite honestly, I think Councillor Moffat touched on it. The neighboring councillors sometimes they work well together. We had the what we call South March or Canada North Community Design Plan. I think from day one, Councillor Wilkinson and I, we attend every meeting together. It's my area still, but we work together. And Councillor Saad was elected 2 years ago, and we did the same thing. We joined meeting, we worked together, and we continue to work together, and we should all work together on this. But I just want the consultant to know you did a bang-on job based on what we saw in the past, in the last two review, how to connect rural resident with and living suburban with suburban and urban with them. So you did a great job. Unfortunately, we had to try to something, and that's why I'm supporting the council from Councillor Harden and Moffat to revisit this in 4 years. Maybe in 4 years, people change of heart, change of mind. Maybe whatever something happened, we should give the and this motion. Make no mistake, is not. You can't bound next council with that motion. This is just to have the clerk give the opportunity to review those boundaries, but it doesn't make it. If next council decide not to, I don't think that will go very far. But with that, again, thanks to you, to the consultant, Beata, Gary, and Matt, Mr. Russell, and I have to say, you guys did a great job, and to our clerk staff for managing those meetings and creating them translation and listening to every person who have something to say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be supporting Councillor Harder Moffat motion and will not be supporting any other motion in this matter.
Thank you, and thank you for your work on this file, Councillor El-Shantiri. Councillor Menard, please, on the motions.
Thank you, Chair. And from what I read, the original consultant's report for the East Cumberland Ward it would have been similar size to Councillor El-Shantiri's ward now, is my understanding. It would have been around the similar size, either a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger, from what I recall reading. I think he makes a good point about that. My concern is around the LPAT hearing that could come on this. And so I have a few questions around that. How does it work? When it goes to LPAT, if the city loses its case of making these changes to Cumberland, what happens? What occurs at that time? Is it that the LPAT says here it reverts back to the original recommendation, or does it go back to council and then we're faced with another decision?
Mr. Mayor, it's Tim Mark speaking. There's many options, but there's what would most likely occur, given the initial report that set off the ward boundary review in this term of council. That report noted that there are issues that need to be addressed. Those issues continue. And therefore, in my opinion, if there were an appeal to local planning appeal tribunal, this tribunal was not satisfied with the evidence in support of whatever bylaw council adopts, my expectation is that the tribunal would determine the boundaries for the city going into the next election.
Okay. That's very helpful, Mr. Mark. In your experience, do they normally determine the boundaries based on the original recommendation that had come to council or from consultants, or how is that determined normally at that stage by them? What criteria do they use? Is it something that's already been in front of us, or do they say, this is what we think is best and here it is?
Mr. Mayor, if there's an appellant, then of course there'll be appellants bringing forward evidence to the tribunal, and it will be based upon the evidence and submissions that are made to the tribunal.
Okay. And do we have an estimated cost for how much that could cost the city in terms of the hearings that could go on?
As far as legal services, while the final decision as to who represents the city is up to the city solicitor, I anticipate it will be done in-house. And so Mr. Davidson, Ms. Baron, and Mr. Matthews will certainly be witnesses for the city. There may be a need for another witness, and it would be their costs. That would be the cost for the city, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and at FEDCO, I did ask you about the timing, and you said that they consider these fairly expeditiously given the nature of them. So I appreciate that as well, Mr. Mark. I think we should be supporting the consultant's report as is, and that's what I'll be doing today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Menard. Does anyone else wish to speak on the motions? So Councillor Harder Moffat motion carried.
Carried.
The King Fleury Overbrook Vanier motion, yeas and nays been called.
Councillor Drews.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Tierney.
No.
Councillor Hubley.
No.
Councillor El-Shantiri.
No.
Councillor Gower.
No.
Councillor McKenney.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
No.
Councillor Cloutier.
No.
Councillor Harder.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
No.
Councillor Moffat.
No.
Councillor Fleury.
Oui.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Kitts.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
No.
Councillor King.
Yes.
Councillor Deans.
No.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor Sutz.
No.
Councillor Eglai.
No.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Mayor Watson.
No.
4 yeas, 19 nays.
So the next motion, can we take the same vote on the Dunbarton Court? Agreed? Transcribed it?
Agreed.
Agreed? Okay. So on the committee recommendation as amended. Carried?
Carried.
Dissent.
Dissent by Fleury and King.
And dissent by Eglai as well.
We should probably go.
Menard and Eglai.
And McKenney.
Should probably go yeas and nays.
Yeah, maybe.
All right. Have we got all the dissents? So
Mayor, maybe yeas and nays.
Okay.
Just make it clean.
Yeas and nays on the boundary report as amended.
Councillor Derues.
Yes.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Hubley.
Yes.
Councillor El-Shantiri.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Councillor McKenney.
No.
Councillor Meehan.
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor Harder.
Yes.
Councillor Luloff.
Oui.
Councillor Moffat.
No.
Councillor Fleury.
No. That wasn't me, for the record.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Kitts.
Yes.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Deans.
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli, Councillor Sudds,
Yes.
Councillor Egloy,
No.
Councillor Menard,
No.
Mayor Watson,
Yes.
17 yeas, 6 nays.
Okay, thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor, sorry for the interruption. There was a phone during my my answering, so can I just see the recording from the or hear the recording from the clerk for me?
Councillor Fleury voted which way?
Councillor Fleury, I have you voting as no.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Fleury, you're voting no?
That's right. I just wanted to confirm, Mr. Mayor, that the clerk did hear me.
Okay. Motion to adopt reports. Motion portant adoption de rapport. Councillor Deans, please. Seconded by Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mayor. That the remaining following reports, excluding those items previously adopted by Council as part of the budget, be received and adopted as amended. 1, the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee Report 18. 2, Audit Committee Report 9. 3, Finance and Audit Development Committee Report 19. 4, Planning Committee Report 33. 5, Transit Commission Report 7. 6, Transportation Committee Report 14. 7, Item 1 of Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 18. 8, the reports from the City Clerk entitled College Board 8, Delegation of Budgetary Authority Approvals and Related Matters, and Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for items subject to the Planning Act explanation requirements at the City Council meeting of November 25th, 2020, and 9, the in-camera report from the Ottawa Board of Health entitled Appointment of Associate Medical Officer of Health, Personal Matters about an Identifiable Individual, reporting out date upon council approval.
Thank you. On the motion by Councillor Deans, carried. Motions of which notice have been previously given. Motion dont avis a été donné entièrement. Councillor McKenney, please. Seconded by Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll read it and just give that comment. Whereas Ottawa has one of the most expensive transit passes in Canada, and whereas Ottawa has one of the most expensive single ride fares in Canada, and whereas the average processing time for an Equipass is 6 weeks, and whereas the requirement to provide proof of annual income is a barrier to applying to the Equipass, and whereas, I should say some Canadian municipalities have moved from a single price low income pass to a sliding scale fare, therefore be it resolved that staff examine options for sliding scale fares and passes, and be it further resolved that staff examine options for eliminating the means test when applying for any low income or special pass, and be it further resolved that staff report to Transit Commission by Q2 2021 on their findings, including how other cities are managing these issues. So essentially what we're looking at is first a sliding scale fare structure. I think that, if you have no money, if you are in a shelter today, there's no reason why we don't just give you a transit pass for $5, a nominal amount. And if you are earning $10,000 a year, why not give it to you for $8? Because you can't purchase it anyway. So it's, I would argue that we're not going to lose money. We're actually going to bring more riders in, and we're going to give people the opportunity to take transit who otherwise can't take transit. So that sliding scale would just, again, create that equity. Presumably what happens is kids who are living in poverty, if they are able to take transit and get around by transit, they stay on transit. We heard from a woman at Transit Commission that she shares her transit pass with 4 people in her house. So she uses it to go to part-time work. She uses it to do groceries, but then just to give it to her older kids to get to high school and to move about the city. There's no reason why we shouldn't provide that family with more options for transit that they can actually afford. The Equipass has got a hard stop, and anything just above it is just not affordable. And if you are earning nothing, if you're on OW or ODSP, that's where the means test comes in. Asking people to prove that they're poor really is difficult for people. It's difficult for them to do it. It's difficult for teenagers to do it, for families to do it. I believe that most people are honest. They aren't going to take something that they don't, need access to. It would benefit our entire system. It would get people onto transit. It would keep them on transit. And most importantly, it would, allow people who, I asked Somerset West Community Health Center, for example, how many bus passes they give out to people who visit. And every month it's over 3,000. People need to get around, and they run out every month. So people are left not being able to get to a medical appointment, not being able to get, downtown to a lunch program, not being able to get, across town for something. So it's, just by providing even just $5 a month, a transit pass for someone, we just think of the benefit that we would be providing for people. So this is asking staff to come back and tell us what that would look like, and we can make that decision then. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Manconi, could you offer an opinion? My understanding is that we do in fact have sliding scale of fares because we have different passes at different rates, and what your thought is on staff conducting this kind of a review. You might be on mute. Is Mr. Manconi there? Or Pat Scrimgeour?
Mr. Mayor, it's Councillor Hubley. Maybe I can help address that for you. We have a working group that was approved by the Commission that's going to look at the Equipass system, find a way to not only freeze the fares, but see if we can do something about reducing the pass as well. A lot of what Councillor McKinney is asking for is part of what that working group will look at. But I'll be upfront. We're not looking at removing the means test for every single pass. In cases of ODSP clients, they go through a means test already to qualify for their benefit. So we can look at waiving the requirement for a means test for clients that have already gone through some sort of process that the city can approve. But we can't just say to the general public, anybody wants a pass, come get it. We won't ask you if you qualify for it. If we do that, it totally destroys the budget. It destroys the long-term planning efforts that have been put together to try to finance improvements within the transit system. So I've clarified there. I was going to speak as well to encourage my colleagues not to vote for this.
And I think Mr. Scrimgeour, on the issue that was raised, if we don't have some kind of a means test, how would you say no to someone who just walks in and has got a good job and a good salary, wants the lower price pass? How would that work?
Well, we would need direction from council on how we are to determine which individual people that try to buy a pass are entitled to which discount. We have that clarity for all of the existing age-based discounts. The direction from council is clear, and we ask people to prove their age. For the let's say the ones that are based on their personal situation, if a discount is clear, if someone shows that they are receiving ODSP, then they are entitled to a community pass. If someone demonstrates that they're low income, according to the low income cutoff, which is the criterion chosen by council, then we can say yes you are or no you are not eligible. We understand the difficulty in doing so and the amount of documents that need to be assembled to make that application, but we're also as flexible as we can be in how they demonstrate that their low income status while still remaining consistent with the direction we have from council. So if there were changes in criteria, or if there were additional gradations of what the councillor calls a sliding scale.
Sorry, Mr. Scrimgeour. Yes. Given what Councillor Hubley mentioned, that there is a working group that Councillor McKenney is a part of, I would move, if I have a seconder, that refer this issue to that working group to come up with a solution. Is there a seconder to refer it? Because
Mr. Mayor, I would second that. I would second that.
Das will second. So anyone on referral? Councillor Brockington, you have your hand up on referral? No?
Not on referral.
Okay, Councillor Hubley on referral?
No, sorry. Yes, Mr. Mayor, I will speak to deferral. I would support
Referral.
that. Yes, I support deferral. As I mentioned, we have a working group that's going to look at a lot of these pieces. We've extended the invitation to Councillor McKinney to join that working group if she wanted to. I don't know where she's at today. Some days she wants to, other days she doesn't. But the work will get done there, and it'll get done early in the next year. We will be coming back to the commission with options, I would think, by Q2 of next year on to how we're going to fix this for next year's budget.
Okay, thank you. On referral, Councillor Dudas.
Well, to me, I see absolutely no issue in looking at how other jurisdictions determine, who gets what kind of passes. I couldn't, when I was trying to do a little bit of digging myself, I have to say I didn't do as much as staff or the working group would have time to do. I couldn't find a municipality that didn't have a means test. And I think it would be interesting to see what the working group can come back with in terms of what that would look like, or how we could have some kind of, fairness in terms of it, and basically how it would play out. I think the best place for this to be examined would be through that working group. I really do hope that Councillor McKenney is part of that, because I think that this motion has a lot of value in it. But it doesn't make sense for us to see a working group looking at some aspects of fares and not look at the whole enchilada, so to speak. So I would fully support it being discussed as a whole piece at the working group and being brought back for that consideration.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenney on referral.
Thank you. 2 points. One, I've never indicated that I don't want to be on the working group. I'm not sure what Councillor Hubley is referring to, but I was put on it and have always looked forward to being a part of that. So just clarify that. Second, I think that, referring it to a working group, we've already heard that the chair is saying no to one aspect of it. And I'm not sure why one person, 23 plus mayor, person council, gets to say yes or no. But, if it goes to the working group, obviously, now we know that, the outcome will be slanted, and we won't get an honest report back from staff. And that's what I'm looking for here. I mean, it can, Q2 2021, it's not a tremendous amount of work. It's just coming back to tell us what this might look like. I would argue that it won't cost us anything, and it will actually be a benefit to people. So, I'd really like to see something come out of today that, that is a cue to people out there who need our help again, that we're listening. To refer it back until, I think that it's clear now that the chair doesn't want to have anything to do with one aspect of it. I think the mayor made it clear that he feels that it's already happening, although it isn't. The Equipass and the Community Pass is not a sliding scale. It's unaffordable for many, so it's referring it back is essentially killing it. Thank you.
Thank you. On referral, Councillor Leeper, please.
Thanks, Mayor. this is it's a leap into the unknown to talk about the elimination of means testing, and it reminds me a lot of the leap into the unknown we're making with respect to eliminating library late fees, for example. I think in order for this to get a really serious shake, it does need to have that strong endorsement from council, and I think we should vote on it today. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. On referral, Councillor Moffat, please.
I'm just trying to find out how these two are separate ideas. So you're taking the motion asks for staff to report back to Transit Commission by Q2 2021, or referral to the working group to come back to Transit Commission by Q2 2021. So who's on the working group?
Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's myself, Councillor McKenney, and Commissioner Caricato were the three identified, along with a number of staff, the treasurer, the general manager, and several other managers from OC Transport that would help make sure that we get all the right information on the table to present to the commission on these options.
Okay, so to be clear, the staff that if we approve this motion and it goes to staff, the staff that we'd be sending it to are also on the working group.
Yeah, in my view, it's a duplication of the effort. I'd like to take an opportunity, Councillor Moffat, to clarify. My comments on eliminating the means test are me expressing the likelihood of something like that getting approved by the commission without a major outcry by taxpayers. It's not predetermined. We're certainly going to look at it. If there's a way to do things, we're going to do it. The goal of the working group is to try to serve these customers even better than we're doing it today.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, I think I agree with you. And I don't think Councillor McKenney wants, to create a situation where I can get a cheaper pass. I think she's looking at lower income folks who don't currently take transit, that if they could. So ultimately, I find that, the two options are virtually the same. So I have no problem sending this to the working group and then coming back to Transit Commission in that format. It seems to really achieve the same goal.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leeper, you've already spoken, so it's Councillor Fleury.
On referral, Mr. Mayor, I too agree with Councillor Moffat. Perhaps the way to refer it is to make sure that we get an actual breakdown and debrief on the particular matter of the mean testing. I don't know if that could be added to the direction if it is referred. Just looking to you and the clerks on process, because I too agree with Scott. I think we're getting to the same thing, but I think Councillor McKenney's point is really getting to, can we get a particular analysis and reporting back on the removal of the means test.
Okay, so Councillor Moffat, you've spoken. Councillor Brockington, have you not spoken already, I believe, on referral?
Mr. Mayor, I did have a question on referral here. I'm looking for an answer on, can we refer with a recommendation that we get back an analysis on the removing of the means test?
Well, yeah, that's the motion before us is on referral, and I guess the reason I moved, I'm the mover of referral, is that the original motion wants to get rid of the means test, but wants to have a sliding scale. Well, how do you determine who fits into the sliding scale if you don't have a means test? Because it just is not making a whole lot of sense. I think it's better to take this offline, bring it to the working group that was established to look at these things. Councillor McKenney is a member of that, Commissioner Caricato, and the chair of Transit, Councillor Hubley. So that's why I'm supporting moving it to referral, because I think it needs some clarification. So Councillor Brockington, do you wish to speak on referral, please?
Yes, I just want to say this. First of all, I'm the seconder of the McKenney motion. I do support referral, but my expectation is that we're going to get more than just the working group reviewed this item and decided not to go down this path, or yes, we will.
No, my understanding is that it will come back to Transit Commission and eventually to Council.
Yeah, I want to see data. We're not asking them to make a decision. I want to see the data and information.
Yeah, I think that's a fair response.
Thank you.
Okay, so on referral, carried? Carried.
Dissent, McKinney.
Okay, dissent by Councillor
Dissent, Leaper.
McKinney.
Dissent.
Motions requiring suspension of the rules. We have Watson, McKinney. Councillor. Okay, so we'll just get it on the screen. So I need to move suspension of the rules with respect to this motion on suspension. Carried. So that whereas the provincial minister of finance may by regulation designate the city of Ottawa as having the power to impose an optional property tax on the assessment of vacant residential units pursuant to section 338-.1 of the Municipal Act. And whereas other municipalities in Ontario are conducting reviews of the optional property tax on vacant residential units to address residential properties left vacant for extended periods until sale or redevelopment that could be used in the interim for rental housing, whereas the city is developing a long-range financial plan to support the construction of affordable housing through Ottawa Housing Corporation and recognizes the importance of sustained funding for affordable housing and wishes to explore the proposed residential vacant unit tax as a means to finance a portion of towards affordable housing. Therefore, be it resolved, the city study the power to impose an optional property tax on the assessment of vacant residential units, including an analysis of potential revenue, and report back by the end of the second quarter of 2021 on the feasibility and viability of implementing such a tax. Just briefly on this, this is timely on a number of fronts. As you know, Toronto announced a similar decision about a week or so ago. In the Globe and Mail today, I'd encourage members of council to read the lead or the only editorial in today's Globe and Mail that talks about Vancouver's success and how the numbers went down, as well as mentioning us and the City of Toronto moving forward with this particular initiative. We had great success, for instance, when I brought forward the recommendation with respect to businesses being vacant and receiving that favorable tax status. The treasurer tells me that's saving us several $1 million a year. I noticed, Councillor McKinney, there was a fire in an abandoned building in your ward just 2 days ago, I think on Somerset, if I'm not mistaken. It was all boarded up. I know Councillor Leaper has many, many buildings throughout his neighborhood that are boarded up. They've become both an eyesore and sometimes dangerous when people are squatting in these buildings and setting them on fire and so on. So I'd urge members of council to support the motion. I thank Councillor McKinney as our housing liaison for her support of this initiative. And I hope that we get a unanimous vote that we can go back to the province and ask for this authority that could potentially bring in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and really spur these absentee and sometimes slum landlords getting their act together and not allowing these buildings to deteriorate to the point where they become a safety hazard in the community. Councillor Dudas on the motion, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I fully support this motion. I think it's absolutely wonderful and timely. I have a number of derelict properties in my ward that I look very much forward to having something dealt with. They're a hazard and an eyesore, to say the least. I just wanted to know for clarification, though, when this is being brought forward, will there be a definition of what we mean by vacant properties? So once again, there's a very strong difference between a derelict property or even a long-term vacant property and a property that is left empty by people who are snowbirds going down to Florida. So I just wanted to make sure that we have some clarity on the definition of what is vacant.
Yeah, there will be. I don't know if the treasurer wants to comment on this, but there's obviously things like if a house is having a difficult time selling and it's empty, we're not going to go and put the tax on them. But we'll use some of the examples that they used in Vancouver that work quite well to address those concerns. Because obviously in a tough real estate market, for instance, it may be difficult for someone to sell a house for upwards a year or so, and they shouldn't be penalized because they haven't sold their house and they're continuing to keep it in good stead. Okay. Wendy, is that a fair assessment?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, you've summarized that extremely well. And Councillor, we would bring back a series of recommendations in terms of how we define it. We would build exemptions around that to suit our local market as well.
Great, thank you. I look forward to supporting this motion and to the resounding report. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leaper, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mayor, thank you very much for bringing this forward. It's a tool that the residents of Kitchissippi are very much looking forward to having, and I hope we're successful in achieving it. Just a quick point of clarification on my support for the motion. I actually hope we don't bring in, a lot of money from a vacant property tax. The goal of the vacant property tax has to be to ensure that properties aren't vacant. And that they are housing people. So I absolutely support the motion, but I do want to make sure it's clear that our goal is not to raise revenues. We want to house people.
No, that's a very good point. Conseiller Fleury, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le maire, moi aussi j'aimerais féliciter.
I too, Mr. Mayor, would like to have this motion tabled because, as you know, we have a number of buildings, and we have Our Lady School, and then on Cumberland there is quite a significant number of such buildings. Now I have a question. I'd like to know if you're open to a friendly amendment, because in order for a building become vacant property, and the ownership has to be determined. And so we should perhaps give 2-3 weeks in case of trespassing. So a lot of work has been done on this. When we looked at the property standards, could you please work with the person who's been in charge of the report on property standards in order to reduce the timeline for property standards? Yes, as far as I'm concerned, the answer is simply yes. So would this be considered as a friendly amendment? Yes. It is not necessary to have another amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Of course.
You're on mute. Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to be on record as saying thank you for bringing this forward. I think that it's important that we ensure that buildings in our city are kept in good repair, are not, we do what we can to make sure that they don't sit boarded up for a lot of reasons. Safety being one of them. Obviously, when you have holes in your streetscape and street front, it's gaps that these empty buildings create. It brings down the entire neighborhood, and people should, people who own property should be responsible for that. So I strongly support this and hope that it, for the most part, allows, compels people to develop, but if not, to have that funding for affordable housing is certainly a very positive step. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I support this motion. I just want to add that all situations aren't the same, and that we should look at getting rid of vacant houses for sure. And I want to give a thanks to our legal staff, because I've got a situation where we have abandoned properties where there's no owner anymore, as it were, numbered companies, etc. And we're working through it all, and it turns out CRA is the lien on it. And I just want to give a shout out of appreciation, because when Canada Revenue Agency is the lien on the property, you got a lot of negotiations to do, and that's another complication. And I don't know how many other situations end up having this situation, but it's a lot of work, and I appreciate the efforts of the city on the file for 19 Burnbrook. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? So just to follow up on something Councillor Leeper indicated, the ideal situation is that this does not become a big source of revenue for us, but in fact, it spurs owners on to get these homes occupied by either tenants or family members. But in those cases where that is not happening, 100% of the money would go back into affordable housing for the City of Ottawa. So thank you for everyone's comments. And on the motion, carried. Adopté. Merci. Next motion is by myself, seconded by Councillor Leeper. We need to suspend the rules of procedure because of the timing of federal funds on suspension. Carried. Whereas the Prince of Wales Bridge is an existing rail structure across the Ottawa River that provides impressive views of the river, Parliament Hill, and LeBreton Flats, but is currently out of service. Whereas the City of Ottawa purchased the currently out-of-service railway bridge from Canadian Pacific Railway in 2005 for a future longer-term transit crossing. And whereas the City has an obligation to maintain the structure and perform periodic inspections, evaluations to assess the condition, ensure integrity of the bridge. Whereas the Prince of Wales Bridge is being retained as a future rail transit bridge in the City's 3-year plan as filed by the Canadian Transportation Agency. And whereas the Prince of Wales Bridge is an asset that can be improved to elevate active transportation between Ottawa and Gatineau as an interim use and would serve as an interprovincial link for cycling commuters, recreational users, and visitors. And whereas preparing the bridge for an interim use would require structural repair work, permits, and approvals to begin construction, including an environmental assessment and design that will take time to complete and obtain. And whereas the funds required for the EA design, internal costs, permits, and approvals are estimated at $540,000. Whereas there's an existing project for the bridge, Prince of Wales Bridge, pier work, which contains funds for the rehabilitation of bridge piers. And whereas staff reviewed opportunities to phase the pier rehabilitation work on the bridge and determined that $540,000 could be reassigned to the EA and design and the bridge deck modification into a multi-use pathway MUP from the account for the Prince of Wales Bridge Pier Work 908990 without impacting the rehabilitation plans of the structure, as pier works can be prioritized with the remaining funds and completed in phases. Therefore, be it resolved that Council authorize the use of existing funds of the Prince of Wales Bridge, account 908990, to undertake environmental assessment and design work for the interim use of the Prince of Wales Bridge as a multi-use pathway. Be it further resolved that Council direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development to notify Council via memo upon the approval of the environmental assessment and provide further details on the detailed design of the multi-use pathway. Be it further resolved that Council further authorize the City, once appropriate funding of the project becomes available from another level of government, to proceed with the construction of the multi-use pathway with the concurrence of the City Treasurer and the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development. So that is seconded by Councillor Leeper. It's literally the dividing line between Councillor McKenney's ward and Councillor Leeper's ward. I believe both, obviously Councillor Leeper is supportive and I believe Councillor McKenney is supportive. It would be a great alternative for cyclists and pedestrians to use that to go into Gatineau. I've talked to the Mayor of Gatineau, who's obviously supportive as well. Sorry, I didn't hear that. So we have questions or comments. If anyone, I don't see any hands up. Speak to it. I see Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been waiting 20 years for this. Every time I go underneath it to go to work, so couldn't come soon enough. It's about time. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Anyone else on the motion? Carried?
Carried.
Okay. The next motion requiring suspension of the rules is moved by Councillor Cloutier, seconded by Councillor Luloff, with respect to the next steps on the hiring of the Auditor General. On suspension of the rules? Carried. Councillor Cloutier.
Merci, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Seconds before I introduce the motion, I didn't have the opportunity myself to thank the Auditor General in his final council meeting. And it's with mixed emotions that I say thank you to him. He's been a well-respected figure at City Hall since 2000, and Auditor General since 2013, as you've said, and he's tough and he's fair. And he's known for his expertise. He also teaches and he likes to travel. So Ken, I hope you will soon be able to enjoy visiting interesting destinations, COVID notwithstanding. I hope the pandemic resolution lines up with your retirement. Merci Ken de tes services. Merci pour ton travail.
Thank you for your services, Ken. Thank you for your work. Thank you for having supported the council for so long. I wish you an excellent retirement.
Thanks for allowing me to say that, Mr. Mayor. and colleagues. On the motion before us, I will summarize the whereases. The first two, and I hope it's on the screen, I don't know. The first two talk about the term of the Auditor General expiring on December 31st. The third whereas refers to motions that were approved in May this year to start the search for new Auditor General. The fourth whereas talks about the challenges that the hiring panel has had with respect to finalizing its decisions for a new Auditor General, and that it requires more time. The fifth one discusses the clauses in the Municipal Act where the Auditor General can delegate his powers to other persons. The sixth whereas refers to the Auditor General having made a written delegation to the two Deputy Auditor Generals, Auditors General, Sonia Brennan and Ed Minor. And the seventh whereas and the eighth whereas refer to the annual audit plan that needs to be submitted. And now we're at the therefores. Therefore, be it resolved that City Council direct the Auditor General hiring panel to report back to Council by Q1 2021 with a recommended candidate for Council's approval as the new Auditor General. Be it further resolved that upon expiration of Ken Hughes' appointment as Auditor General on December 31st, 2020, Deputy Auditor Generals Sonia Brennan and Ed Minor shall operate the office of the Auditor General on an interim basis in accordance with their delegated statutory powers and duties as described in this motion, and pursuant to any requirements relating to the Auditor General under the Municipal Act 2001 and the Bylaw 2013-375 as amended until the new Auditor General is appointed. And the final, therefore be it resolved that Council waive the requirements set out in subsection 11.1 of Bylaw 2013-375 as amended for the current Auditor General to submit to Council an annual audit plan for 2021 with Council to issue further direction to the new Auditor General upon appointment regarding the timing of an interim audit plan for 2021.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Gower has a question or comment. Councillor?
Thank you. Could the clerk's team please put that motion back up? There's just something in the first, therefore be it resolved, that I wanted to ask the mover for clarity on. I think, I don't want to assume, but I think the intention is to have a recommendation back to Council by the end of Q1 2021. And if that's the case, would you accept as a friendly amendment that we add the word by the end of Q1 of 2021?
It says that we would report back to Council by Q1 2021. You're saying the end of Q1. I think that's implied, but I am fine with that.
Okay, so a friendly amendment.
That we won't be doing this on January 2nd, 2021.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a friendly amendment. Thank you, Councillor Gower, and thank you, Councillor Cloutier. Merci, Conseiller Cloutier. So on the motion, carried. I think Councillor Gower, is that Quitters Rest coffee shop right behind you? Kathleen should pay you royalties for that free advertising.
Well, we'll check with the Integrity Commissioner, but...
Looks good. Next motion requiring suspension of the rules is a demolition control at 29 Marquette, moved by Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor McKenney. On suspension, carried. Councillor Conseiller Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and merci, Madame la greffière adjointe de Nathalie.
Thank you.
The building of 29 Marquette Avenue, located in Vanier, is in advanced state of disrepair, and whereas there are neighborhood concerns related to criminal activity in the building on the property in addition to fire risk, and whereas given the dilapidated condition of the building and the community safety concerns, it would be of public interest to demolish the building. And whereas there is currently no building permit applications for the replacement of building, therefore be it resolved that Council approve demolition control for the existing building on the property subject to the following condition. One, that until the time of the construction of the first replacement building, the registered owner shall landscape the property to the satisfaction of the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development. The registered owner shall prohibit the use of the property for other interim uses and maintain the property in accordance with the property standards bylaw. 2, that the landscaping of the property shall be finalized in collaboration with city staff. 3, that owners shall pay 100% securities to the city for the value of the landscaping property for the securities to be released once these works are completed. 4, the owner agrees that the discretion of the General Manager, Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department, a replacement building must be substantially completed within 5 years from the date of this approval, and in default thereof, the clerk shall enter into a collector roll to sum of $5,000 for the residential dwelling to be demolished. 5, the registered owners shall enter into an agreement with the City of Ottawa to include the foregoing conditions and pay all costs associated with the registration of said agreement as such time as the building permit is issued to redevelop the site and a replacement building is in place. The agreement will become null and void and will be released upon request of the owner. The owner shall pay all costs associated with the release of the agreement. 6, the owner agrees that the demolition permit will not be issued and the building cannot be demolished until such time that the agreement references herein has been executed and registered on titles. 7, this approval is considered null and void if the agreement is not executed within 6 months of council approval.
Okay, I see no hands up. So on the motion by Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor McKinney. Carried. The next motion requiring suspension of the rules is 146 Russell Avenue on suspension. Carried. I think, Councillor, because it's all, aside from the address, the same as what you just read, you can probably just put it up on the screen. This is involving 146 Russell Avenue. It's the same template in terms of conditions as I understand it.
Correct. And this one, instead of being located in Vanier, is located in Sandy Hill, Mr.
Yeah. So on the motion?
Carried.
Thank you.
Are there any other motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure? Deputy Clerk? None. Motions. Notice the motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. Avis de motion présent à réunion subséquente. Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor Deans. Notice the motion we request to Ottawa Police Services Board for electric vehicles. Councillor Fleury, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to thank Monsieur Letourneau and Cyril Rogers and Councillor Deans Chair Deans for working with me on this. Whereas the City of Ottawa is committing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and whereas the city is planning to install 24 new on-street electric vehicle charging stations at 12 stations across Ottawa, whereas these stations are being installed as part of the street parking facility improvements and to increase uptake in electric vehicles in Ottawa. Whereas switching from gas and diesel to electric vehicles is one of the most important actions required to meet Ottawa's target to reduce GHG emissions by 100% by 2050. Whereas to meet this target by 2030, 90% of new vehicles sold will have to be electric. Therefore, be it resolved that Ottawa City Council requests that the Ottawa Police Services Board ask the Ottawa Police Services to work with the City of Ottawa and its partners in Vary, an affiliate of Hydro Ottawa, to support under the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program to complete an assessment in 2021 to determine if an electric vehicle pilot project can be implemented by the Ottawa Police Services where operationally feasible.
Okay, so we'll deal with that at our next meeting. The next notice of motion is by Councillor King, seconded by Councillor Harder. Councillor King.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will summarize the whereases. Basically, this motion is a response to residents' advocacy. That's began in 2018, and in the spirit of reconciliation with First Nations people who reside in the nation's capital, I've been working with the Lyndon Lee community in Rideau Rockcliffe to see L'Angevin Avenue renamed. L'Angevin Avenue was named for a founding father of Confederation who's considered a key architect of the residential school system. These schools forcibly removed Indigenous children from their families and undermined Indigenous identity and culture. In order to positively affirm that Indigenous identity, heritage, and culture, the community, in conjunction with the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition, have asked that the street be renamed Commanda Way to honor the late Algonquin elder, spiritual leader, and Kitigon Zibi First Nation Chief William Kamau. Therefore, be it resolved that Council approve that L'Angevin Avenue, located in Rideau Rockcliffe, Ward 13, be renamed Commanda Way, And be it further resolved that council directs staff in the addressing and signs branch of building code services work with the ward councillor to implement the street name change in a timely manner while respecting the timelines issued by Canada Post. And be it further resolved that all costs related to the street renaming, including name change fee, blade signs, and posts notifications, along with any subsequent unveiling, will be funded through the councillor's office. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other notices of motion for our next meeting? See none. Okay. Motion to introduce bylaws. Motion portant présentation de règlement. Conseillère Dean, s'il vous plaît, appuyé par conseillère Meehan.
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws 3 readings be read and passed.
Carried. Adopté. Confirmation bylaw. Councillor Deans, please.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of December 9th, 2020.
Carried.
Carried.
Deputy Clerk, are there any inquiries, written inquiries? Councillor Deans, adjournment.
That the proceedings of the city council meeting of December 9th, 2020 be adjourned.
Carried.
Carried.
Everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, a safe holiday for all. And a big thank you to all our staff who will be working over the holidays, whether it's in the roads department or garbage and recycling or bylaw, police, fire, paramedics, the many individuals that work during those Christmas and holiday season. We wish them the very, very best, that they too have a safe and enjoyable holiday. And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. Merci. Bye-bye. Just to remind everyone, the media availability will take place in 10 minutes from now. On va commencer la réunion de conférence de presse dans 10 minutes. Merci.
Merry Christmas all.